everybody. If everybody can please quiet down, we're going to start this meeting, and I think this is a record crowd for this room, so appreciate you all coming out tonight. So let's get it started. So I'm going to call the meeting to order, and if everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. For those of you who have never attended any of our meetings before, there's certain procedures we got to go through. So in order to have a formal meeting, we have to follow some procedures. So after the Pledge of Allegiance, I do some announcements in executive sessions and related to the executive sessions as well. So the public is hereby advised of the audio and video recording of this meeting for the purposes of rebroadcasting. And in terms of executive sessions, there was an executive session of the board held on 9/8 of this year for matter of personnel on an administrative employee. And then there was a second executive session of the property committee held on 9/12 for matters of potential litigation. And then there was an executive session of the finance committee held on 9/14 for an administrative personnel matter and on a matter of current litigation with SW 101 LLC and WNR 38 LLC and Board of Assessment Appeals of Montgomery County. And that doesn't mean anything to me either. I just have to read it. All right. In terms of attendance, we have everybody here tonight except for Mr. Dorn, who is out of town. Now I'm going to turn over the meeting to Dr. Zerbe for recognition of guests and scheduled speakers.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. This evening, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the students of Arcola and their families. These fine students are here tonight to be recognized for high academic achievement in all 4 marking periods during the 2015-16 school year. I'd like to invite our new principal, Ms. Amy Mangano, to come forward.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction, and I apologize. I know we have people a little bit everywhere outside in the hall and all up in the back, but I have to say before I begin to acknowledge students, I really want to thank everybody for being here tonight. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to be principal of this school, and when I see everybody coming out tonight, it makes me very excited and very, very proud. So thank you for letting me be here representing all of you. We have 2 groups of students we'd like to acknowledge this evening, and the first is our 7th grade. Please note that the award itself, I'll mention the reason for the award. The reason for the award is that these students, whose names appear in front of you, have received a minimum cumulative GPA of a 93% in all subject areas throughout the year. Now, beyond that is a big deal. Beyond that, I need to make mention of a few things. First of all, before I talk about students, it's the parents. Thank you for everything you've done to support your child in their academic career. It's a big job, and your connection and supporting your child with us at school is tremendous, and we value it. So thank you for that relationship. The second group I'd like to make sure I mention are the teachers. And without both of those groups, parents and teachers working together on behalf of children, this may or may not be possible, but we have that here, and we're very fortunate. And last but never least are our students. And what I want to make mention of them is, besides the grade, which is just one mere number, I think it goes beyond a number. It's about grit and resiliency and dedication and work ethic that these students have shown. And that, to me, far outreaches a number. You can't even probably put a price on that. So I want to make sure that I recognize and acknowledge everything you did to earn and maintain what you did. So our first group of students, all of our names are up here, and this is our 7th grade group. Can we please take a minute and acknowledge and give everyone a round of applause and bring up our 7th grade students. You want a minute? Go ahead.
Could we please have our 7th grade students come to the front of the boardroom?
7th grade, come on down. Please. And go ahead right in front, guys. Go ahead right in front. It's okay. Sam Trout. Yep, go ahead right in the front, guys. That's it. Go ahead. Go ahead. Right in the front row. Oh, you look wonderful. I know. If we could just take a moment and if you could give your attention to this fine group of students, and again, as I mentioned, all of their hard work and effort and commitment throughout the year, and let's give them a round of applause for our 7th grade students.
When I think back to my years in school and I think back to 7th grade, I'm really impressed with how well they did. I know how much hard work they put into it and all their families. Well, you know, the families, the educators, and the students put a lot of hard work in. When I look at this crowd, I would like to think that my refrigerator fueled some of these brains here as they're over at our house eating quite a little bit of the food there. So thank you for everybody in doing your hard work, and keep it up. This is fantastic. We hope this group grows by year and gets bigger and bigger, so thank you.
And if this group would like, we have your certificates here this evening, and what I will do is I will meet you back out in the lobby so you can make sure you take it with you tonight. If you do not want to wait for that, you can surely pick it up tomorrow at school. Thank you, 7th grade students.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Always a big crowd. So you do have their certificates?
I do. Yep.
Okay, let me get my daughter.
While our 7th grade is heading to the back for their certificates, if I could just have everybody's attention, please. Thank you. Thanks so much. At this time, I'd like to make sure we call down our 8th grade students. If they could come up to the front, please, that would be wonderful.
Their names are projected.
Oh, thank you. Come on down.
Oh, shit, I can't see. Hang on.
Take care. Just go ahead in front, guys. Some of you taller ones may want to head to the back. No, you're tall. Go to the back. Okay, 8th grade students. I want to thank you, I want to congratulate you, but I also want to challenge you because this is a big year for you before you move to the high school. So remember all the things you did to get to this point, and keep up the great work. Can we give a round of applause for our 8th grade students, please? Thank you very much. I will meet you in the back as well. And thank you, everyone, for your attention this evening. Come on down. Yep, you're on the back.
My friend Alice and Sammy asked me to get it.
Yeah, I'll get it up. Go ahead up, guys. We'll meet you in the back and get you your certificates.
Oh, you're right. Where are they? We have to go up. Where did they say to go?
In the back.
Yeah. You're a great president.
While we're in transition, members of the board, our next presentation is going to be from Dr. Katona. I ask that you transition to the front row for the presentation. And family members, anyone wishing to leave at this time, you're welcome to do so. We'll have a few minutes until we'll get started back with the agenda.
Thank you.
No. Are you related to
Good thing or bad?
It's good.
You know what you did?
Oh, I don't know. 7.
They can if you don't want to wait. That's fine.
Oh, I was going to just ask for my son.
I've been to debates a lot. Yeah, 2 lines is before and 2 points is a line.
No, certain people got the award right here. Like Alyssa just got the award as well.
Really?
Yeah.
I think
Any evidence
got the award that day.
But I love that.
Half the people that got the award, like, didn't even show up.
I love how they said, "Oh, thank you all for coming," but they won't stay for the full thing.
There's like no people left.
No one's gonna be.
Everybody's still here.
I didn't get my award.
Like the strike rate for my parents. Bragging rights.
I'm right behind you.
Thank you.
Troy said he was coming.
Troy said he was coming because he didn't realize it was a work session. As soon as he realized, because he was talking to Susan one night, and as soon as Susan said it's a work session, he was, I'm not going. Good choice, Troy.
Can't blame him.
My voice holds up. It's dry.
Yeah, apparently I got sinus surgery tomorrow at 6:30. I got sinus surgery. Give me a hospital at 6:30. I'm open this up, but deviated septum.
Oh, so you're going to be out? Oh man, Joe had his deviated septum repaired about 20 years ago.
I'm hoping they came a long way.
It was not, I would hope so, because it wasn't pretty. It was not pretty. And it kept him from snoring for a while, but then I think it grows back.
I want the fantasy to go well too. My wife does anyway. No snoring.
I don't know how he doesn't wake himself up. It just amazes me.
Sorry, we'll just wait for our kid.
Okay, good evening. This evening I have for you a brief overview of information related to full-day kindergarten, along with potential next steps. So a few weeks ago, I gave a presentation to the Education Committee on full-day kindergarten. And the topics that are on this slide are those I focused on at that time, which basically provided the background for why we might be interested in learning more about and considering full-day kindergarten. At that time, the committee asked that I bring a presentation to the full board during the September work session in order to be given further direction. So here are some things when we think about research with full-day kindergarten. Here are some things that we know, and among those, they revolve around the additional time that full-day kindergarten provides. So among those items, the first is helping students prepare for mastery of first grade skills, particularly in math and reading. This is one of the areas that the research looks at and speaks to quite a bit. So given the PA core, there are a number of skills that students are expected to master in kindergarten, and then there are another set of skills that they're expected to master in first grade. The thinking is that in kindergarten they would be introduced to those skills, which is how it proceeds throughout any of the grade levels. So in addition to that, full day also allows them time to be introduced to both sets of skills. You can also see other benefits that have been identified through the research. Another important aspect of the consideration for full day is the connection it has with our strategic plan. In our strategic plan, we have a goal for addressing the needs of the whole child. And those two areas, the social, emotional supports and well-developed transitions, are two areas that are often referred to in terms of the benefits of full-day kindergarten. So in addition to those, we also
look at areas such as those related to future costs related to remediation and special education referrals. These are sample, and I stress sample, schedules that show how our students might currently go through their half-day schedule in kindergarten and compared to what a schedule could look like for a full day. So again, obviously there's going to be more time in the full day, but then there are also some other activities that are involved in full day and benefits that we do not necessarily have the time to deliver in half-day sessions. And they include both academic and socialization type activities. So here is a chart that outlines what those schedules translate into in terms of minutes in a week. So you can see, for example, again, obviously a clear difference in the instructional time, but you also see that the socialization is greatly increased, the socialization opportunities, as well as this area of morning routines, which is something that currently, again, even the students who come in AM don't have an opportunity for that because they come in and they need to get into their academic block and get through the morning through the 2.5 hours that they have at that point. So some of the current trends with kindergarten. Wanted to take a look at this on 3 levels, national, state, and local. Nationwide, the interest in exploring and supporting full-day kindergarten continues to grow. Some of the most recent data shows an increase from the 70s through 2012. And then there is also an emphasis on early childhood in the ESSA legislation slated to go into effect starting next year, along with a concern for equity in education across states. As I was looking at some different states that were going to full-day K across the board, there were places such as Washington where at first they were thinking about perhaps having parents pay something or offering it to some, and they decided that it was too important an item to let to chance, and so they decided that they were going to support it, and they'll be doing that starting next year. There have also been increases in kindergarten enrollment in the state of Pennsylvania since it became more of a focus in the early 2000s. You can see some of the information there. While it may only look, it's only 6 percentage points between 2012 and 2016 enrollment in full day, what's important to that is that it has been consistently growing over the years, and so we would expect that next year that's going to rise again. And then local trends also demonstrate the importance of full day offerings. I connected with about a dozen other districts in our county that offer full day and found the majority have had it in place for more than 10 years. Several of them said they couldn't imagine offering anything else. There was also a report that was done in 2013 looking at Montgomery County, and it cited that Methacton was one of 4 districts where the free and reduced lunch rates doubled. 2 of the other 4 districts offer full-day kindergarten, and the 3rd is scheduled to offer it beginning next year once again. So these are some key impact areas for further investigation. We would want to get some more specific information on the academic, social, and emotional behavioral growth, special education referrals, looking to see if we could find information where it would pull back on those, retention, instructional schedules, because again, what I showed you were samples, and there are many examples of what schedules could look like. Professional development, taking our teachers from teaching in half-day settings to full-day, classroom space, and other related costs. So if the board chooses to move forward with the Education Committee's recommendation, we would pull people together to get information back to you in these areas sometime at the beginning of December. And specifically, we would look at, from the time you would ask for more information through the end of October, to convene a committee of kindergarten teachers and administrators to further investigate those key areas. We would come together to review the information and develop a presentation. At the beginning of November, we would look to connect with a group of parents, probably coordinated through our Home and School Association, to gather feedback from them and then incorporate that into the presentation that we would bring to you. By the beginning of December, then present findings to the school board for further direction and determine at that point if we want to move forward to consider in 2017-18. And that is the end of my brief presentation on this, because again, at this point, the purpose was just for you to let me know if you would like me to go through this process and bring additional information forward.
And if I could ask the board to return to their seats, and we can open up, so long as we're okay, we'll open up for some discussion here this evening to provide the administration some direction.
All right, thank you for the presentation. Based on what I saw, it seems like it's a trend that more and more schools are doing the full-day kindergarten. That's correct? Yeah. And then there are some that are offering either or. Do you have any insights as to why they're offering that option as opposed to just going full-day kindergarten or staying at half?
The ones that are currently offering it in Montgomery County are offering all full day. There are certainly a number of districts. Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's just that it may be space. Sometimes it may be that they just decided that they were just going to target certain groups of students to offer this. So there are any number of reasons why they might. But again, as I indicated, there has been a lot more chatter about people moving forward with full day.
Start down at that end.
I will just add, first of all, thank you, Dr. Katona. As the chair of the Education Committee, and I don't want to speak for Brenda or Paul, but the three of us as the Education Committee felt this was important to go to the next step, as Dr. Katona suggested, for all of the reasons that she brought up this evening. And it was about an hour, at least, of conversation at our last Education Committee meeting to start the process of more seriously looking at this.
Yes, I was supportive at the Education Committee. I did mention, of course, that I'm also a member of the Finance Committee, and that I would be interested to know about the facts and figures as well as about the education aspects. But I have a wholehearted endorsement for full-day kindergarten if there is any possible way that we can do that.
Thank you, Dr. Katona, for your presentation. I would like to express my interest in going ahead and getting some more information with this. As Brenda said, as a member of the Finance Committee as well, I do think it's very important to get the associated costs with, not just what it would, the additional costs, but if there's any, cost savings that could be attached with this too, such as, bus driving, eliminating 2 midday runs. I mean, I'm sure that would save us some amount of money there. And I think this is a great program for our kids. I think it's good for the students themselves. You brought up the free and reduced lunch. There's statistics out there that those are the students who can benefit the most from this. And I think that it's very important that we do the most that we can for those students. So yes, I'd definitely like to hear some more information about this. Thank you.
Yes. This has been floated out there over the years, and I've always been in favor of the full-day kindergarten, but the questions I have, and one of the reasons why I was in favor is the educational end, getting them started out early, but also with a lot of single moms and dads and families that both parents work, being what the taxes are, it gives them a little more flexibility with being able to work and pay the bills. Setting that aside, Dr. Katona brought up a few things, and I would like to know, prior to going forward, is getting more information as far as if there's increases in other districts with free and subsidized lunches that have full-day kindergarten versus half-day. That will give us a trend of maybe people will seek out moving into Methacton, whether it's through apartments, through moving into somebody's house just to get them here because it's full day. So a real good idea of what our neighboring school districts, if they have it, what kind of inflow of students we can get, because that will attract people as far as a full day. The other is the numbers associated with, if we go to a full day, what were the efficiencies or what were the statistics of kids with their reading and math with the half day? Where were they placed on achievement, and were they satisfactory or above? And if we went to a full day, would that bring that other percentage of students up to that? And what the number of students would be? That way, when we look at the costs of the program, we can look at how our investment in the full-day kindergarten, how that's going to turn into reducing costs down the road because of extra training, teaching of children because they didn't have that full-day kindergarten. So I'd really like to know a budget end, but also the performance end, and how that relates to what we have now.
I would like to say I'm also thrilled that we're exploring this. I think it's something that has been a long time coming for our district, and I'm glad to see that we're starting to look into it in further detail. I think that the best take-home message for me in the presentation was when you said that it may help reduce future costs for remediation and special education referrals, and I'd love to see more information on that, because to me, that's the win-win. It's improving educational outcomes. It's also improving the financial picture for the district. So if we can get more information on that, I think it'll make it a whole lot clearer for us and what direction we need to go with this. But again, I'm all for moving this to the next level.
On the Education Committee, also very supportive of investigating the potential of this, and share Brenda's concern about the ability to afford it, but I think we should be making decisions based on the education first and what choices we want to make, and then deciding if we can afford it, if we want to afford it. So I think that the process is good from a view of education and first. Two things I agree with what Jim and Kim sort of mentioned too, but also there's a whole child aspect to the strategic plan that is not necessarily measurable. So I think that we need to at least consider that as part of our input if we feel that this provides a benefit for that whole child benefit, the whole child aspect. And also, Dr. Katona, I think in the education meeting you mentioned some numbers related to the change in English as second language students and the increase in Methacton. So I don't know if you have any of those stats in front of you, but I think it would be beneficial for people to understand the demographics of Methacton as it changes a little bit, and how many students of English as second language even just came in late into the process, even in this school year, if you have any of those off the top of your head.
I don't have that in front of me, and I think Dr. Angstad had mentioned that. However, if I do recall correctly, we have more than 50, I believe, that have come in over the last month or so, since August. And so, we're still working through their, we don't know yet what types of support they may need, but we're still working through that. But we know that we saw that same trend last year as well. So that's a good point.
Okay, there we go. I think it's a great idea to look into it. I don't know how many years ago, but as Jim said, it's been floated by here at some points. I would say that I am cautiously I will cautiously say to go ahead and look into this. My main concern is cost. Full-day kindergarten is a big nut to crack when you consider that, and not just because of hiring, more professional staff, but as far as the bus runs, you're actually going to increase your bus runs because you have more kids to transport. You do have a very intriguing bit of data, which I'd like to see too, is other districts that have had implemented full-day kindergarten, how that has related to special ed cases, and how have they gone down, and what grade levels have they gone down, or have they gone down in the early elementary ones and then remained steady at some point through the upper grade levels. Paul's point to the whole child aspect is very good. There's a lot of things to look and a lot of things to digest on this, and I definitely think the only way to do that is to actually go through and get the information. So that's where we are.
I'd like to see us go ahead with it. I think we need to make it more of an iterative process. So I think the next presentation is going to hopefully provide us a lot more detail, and then we got to think through that and figure out the next steps, because there's quite a few moving parts. So, one of the things Herb said triggered a thought in my mind is how many children are there that are in other private kindergartens, because they can get full-day kindergarten somewhere else, that are going to come back to the school district. It might be only one or two, but it might be quite a few. So we need to understand things like that and dynamics like that to really work through the pluses and minuses.
On that point, Chris, and this is just a logistical point, when they do give this presentation, to have it as the only thing that we're getting presented on, because I'm sure it's going to generate a lot of talk and and I don't want to shortchange the time frame, because it's going to be a lot of information we're all going to really want to see, so.
Thank you, members of the board. I think we have our direction, and we'll get moving on that process. Thank you very much for your input. Next on the agenda, we have transportation update. We have Mr. Schock here this evening. He has a handout in front of you. I believe there's some handouts on the back table. But before Mr. Schock begins, I'd just like to say a few words, if I could. As Mr. Schock is going to present this evening as our district consultant on transportation, he has returned to provide the board with an update on transportation matters. Before he begins his presentation, it's important that I share with you how we arrived at such a challenging start of this current school year. In general, the issues for our parents and their children, our students, this year resulted from failures to complete routing properly. This failure led to a condensed time frame to complete routing. As such, resulted in major confusion for the bus drivers, our students, and our families. Please know that upon becoming aware of the magnitude of the matter, we proceeded to address it. And when I say we, I mean between the district, First Student, we all got together and we teamed up on this particular matter to best address it and in a timely fashion. We established a call center to document concerns from parents. We engaged the drivers on a daily basis to gather their feedback. We assigned administrative staff to assist in addressing many of the more erroneous matters in routing. We did this all at the same time keeping our priority of safety at the forefront of our decision-making process and the communication with our families as well. Last week, we were able to engage additional safety and routing assistance from First Student to help us with some of the late arrivals to school, as well as some of the private and non-public lateness issues. Today, we continue to review the data input from drivers and address the concerns from our parents in an attempt to reach some normalcy with our transportation within the next 2 weeks by addressing any additional safety complaints and to address the timing and the long bus routes. In the long term, I plan to bring back to the board a recommendation on how Methacton can avoid another start like this and how we can regain the trust in our ability, the trust in our family and our ability to provide busing services. So with that said, I ask Mr. Schott to come forward. The handouts that he's going to speak to this evening is in front of you, and you can begin.
Good evening. If you'll turn to the second page, I think it's important to understand what we were attempting to do here. And I was engaged back in the late spring to work with an advisory committee to establish the guidelines for the system, including the maximum ride times, the seating capacity, and other performance standards. But most importantly, it was to review and refine the working relationship between the transportation manager that was a district employee and First Students Management. In the middle of July, the transportation manager for the district left, and that posed a need to review the current status. So we identified all the duties that needed to be done and redefined who might do them, when, and how. In doing that, we reviewed the existing contracts both with First Student, the transportation contractor, as well as the bus router who'd been working for several months at that point. We also reviewed state laws and state audit requirements because these requirements pose very specific duties on the district. As Dr. Zerbe mentioned, we found ourselves in a situation in mid-July where we had a very condensed period to work on the routing with the staffing changes. So on the next page, I think what we've all learned, and I knew this before, but I think the community's learned this, that transportation is a complex system, and bus routing is the key to the performance of the system. It affects many of the components. First of all, it affects the length of the ride time. It affects what vehicles you're using and the various capacities you need. That affects the number of vehicles and the number of drivers. Good routing with good reports coming off the computer system minimize the training requirements as drivers have good turn-by-turn directions coming off the system. And that assists not only the drivers as they start at the beginning of the school year, but also the substitute drivers as they drive throughout the year. So what modern bus routing involves in the past decade is a navigation system, like many of you may have in your cars, that is tied to a powerful relational database with reporting capabilities. But key to that is map calibration, and I think we talked about this last time. But what has to happen to have reliable times in the system and reliable turn-by-turn directions is that those travel times must be accurate and they must be set for time of day based on the type of road. And that is possible with these modern systems. All the impassable roads and difficult turns must be blocked so that the buses can't be routed along those roads and to make those turns. The door side stops so that students don't have to cross certain types of roads must be calibrated in the system and locked in for that road. The safe stop locations that can be identified, and we were using national standards to look at that, need to be locked in and not move from year to year. And then there needs to be a minimal number of house stops, but nevertheless you'll need some house stops based on the road network. The following slide is a table that gives you a sense of where we were. This is just an example of how you need to look at this. And good routing involves calling up all the routes for that school and looking at how those buses are used. Are they at or over capacity, and how are they doing in terms of time? So let me just walk you through this table. The left column talks about the buses. Do they serve, in this case, K to 4, kindergarten, special ed? What's the bus number? What's its manufacturer's capacity? And then the committee established that at the elementary level we would use 2.5 students per seat, which reduces that manufacturer's capacity for an 84 capacity bus to 70, and for a 72 to a 60 capacity that the district was using. So if we just look at the first bus there, bus 1, what we find is it's over the capacity by 2 students. It has 72 rather than 70. It's running 21 minutes, so it's working through a condensed area with many students at a stop. So what needs to happen then with the software is you take a look at that bus, you call it up on the screen, and identify the stop sequence. They're all numbered, and then you have to look at the buses shown in green there. There would be 5 buses that could help. You'd call them up on the screen, and all those buses have capacity and time. So those would be the buses you look at. And the reason you do this by school is because if you want to create a doorside stop and you're only looking at one bus, you're going to have to drive up the road this way to pick up the students on this door side, turn around and drive back the other way. If you're looking at a whole school, you might find a bus that is nearby that could go that other direction, saving you both time and the inconvenience and the difficulty of making those types of turns. So what you had here at Arrowhead a week or so ago was this situation where there were 2 buses due to late summer enrollments that were slightly over the capacity, but you had 5 buses that could help on that. So to show you a little bit different view of this, if you'll turn to the next page, and I think it's kind of important that the school board develop some simple visuals and some simple analytical methods to determine whether you're getting good routing and efficient and effective use of the system. So this is the kind of thing we showed you in the previously, where we're saying on the horizontal axis from left to right, you have the number of riders. And in the far right, you have that bus with 72. In the far left, you have a bus with 15 students. And that 15-student bus is running for 15 minutes. There are 2 buses in the center with about 35 riders running 15 minutes also. So if you're looking to solve either a bus that is over capacity or riding too long, you have to look at those several buses, and they were shown in green on the prior page. If you'll turn to the next page, though, this is really where you have high gain in terms of more effective use of your buses. And I think we showed you an earlier version of this, but this was the version as of a couple weeks ago. It needs to be updated based on work done in the last week or so. What this amounts to is every row represents a bus, every column represents a 5-minute increment from early in the morning through the midday through the afternoon. So to describe how this works, if you look at bus 1, it's got a yellow section where it's driving for 5 minutes unloaded till it picks up the first high school student, shown in red. Then it's got a 15-minute segment before it goes to the Arcola, shown in the dark blue, and then the Arrowhead, I believe that is, in the purple along with all the other elementaries, and then it's driving back to the garage as shown unloaded in yellow. So you have red showing the high school, blue showing both Arcola and in the lighter blue Skyview, purple showing the elementaries. Then you have the midday runs, and you have the PM runs. PM will always be more difficult in that it has a compressed bell time. So now the way you need to look at this, though, is that if there is excessive white space between a first run and a second run in the morning or the afternoon, that gives you an opportunity to find a run on some other bus and fill that unloaded period. And so I'm showing you in orange in the left column the possible buses at that time that could be considered. And from my experience in the past, if you've got a dozen opportunities like that, you can expect 4 or 5 of them to be realistic in terms of the times allowing you to make the times and distances allowing you to fill those white spaces and eliminate the need for those buses that are underutilized. So what I'm giving you here are some fairly simple tools to take very complex data and understand whether you have an efficient and effective system. So regardless of how you go in the future, I would suggest you use these kind of tools. So one of the things that we are looking at is how these contracts might need to be revised going forward. The bus contract, it's a 25-page contract, but in terms of the key provisions regarding the routing and the operation, they're required to provide safe, efficient, reliable, on-time transportation. There are penalties for not being on time. The school district plans the routes with contractor cooperation. That cooperation is detailed in about 8 or 10 provisions of the contract. The contractor adheres to the planned routes, and they can't make changes to those routes without written approval. And the contractor must maintain the same software as the district uses. That's the provision of your current contract that you need to be aware of, and obviously it'd be good to have further refinement of that. Now, when you look at having a bus router, there are various things you can do. You can either employ one, you can contract an independent router, or in some cases the bus contractor would do that for you. Regardless of who's going to do it, I think you still need to use these simple visual tools to understand the effectiveness of it. Now, key to this also is that these routes, the initial routes, need to be done early in the summer to provide enough time for review. Then the final routes would need to be done by early August, and then at that point there can be minor adjustments, because as with this summer, there were well over a couple hundred students that showed up in that last month, and they can affect how many students are on the bus. They can affect the distance of the ride as you cap the enrollment in one school and make those riders go to a different school. So there are many impacts of the last period in the summer. So let's talk on the final slide here about the administrative oversight, because what I've been asked to consider is there a way to minimize the amount of district effort required to administer and oversee this contract? And what would that involve in terms of revising these contracts, the terminology and the understanding of everybody? What operating procedures could be revised, eliminating the district staff and having more direct involvement of the transportation contractor? How would all parties be trained on those revisions, and what has to happen in state reporting, which affects your subsidy? The transportation is heavily subsidized. So the final thing that I would see as possible next steps would be, we have had 3 meetings of this Parent and Administrator Advisory Committee. I think we had always talked about a final meeting of that to have lessons learned and consider the opportunities for improvement going ahead. And then there are some other considerations. Are you interested in having the bus routing done independently? If you're going to do that, the amount of time and effort it takes the bus router to do that is dependent on the quality of the software, so it's sort of a joint decision. And in addition, as I think we saw this summer, it's important that you buy software that has plenty of experienced users in case you run into a situation late in the summer that you need additional help. You need a very major decision on the calibration of the computer mapping. How do you take all that knowledge that your drivers have and other people with 30 years experience in the transportation office have, and how do you lock that into the map in the event that one of those people gets sick, leaves, and you don't want to lose that local knowledge? And then finally, how do you want to refine these processes if you decide to minimize the amount of administrative staffing? So those are the considerations at this point. At this point, I'll open myself up to any questions, comments.
I guess I'll start off. So from my perspective, it's hard to understand what are the right decisions to go forward with without understanding the root causes of what went wrong with this school year. So, saying that perhaps a different software, I guess I speak for myself, but maybe most of the board would agree, we don't understand what benefit or what went wrong with the current software or any of the decision-making processes. So, talking about what we're going to do in the future in terms of changes, I think we need to spend a good amount of time understanding what were the root causes of where we fell short this year.
And that's certainly something that as an administrative team for us to review and then to share back as we talk about how we want to proceed forward. So prior to a recommendation, we'll certainly share that information with the board. But generally speaking, I mean, when the dust settled, it was a matter of routing, and with that is essentially the challenge with not having. It was our responsibility as a district to complete the routing. And we fell short on that. And as a result, and with some personnel changes, we ran into a condensed time frame to get that done. And then there were just additional challenges as those of us who were less than experienced in some of the information and operations to get it ready in 3 weeks when it normally takes 4 or 5 months to get it done.
It is what it is, but I feel a little foolish. In my mind, I heard we have had the same routes for a long time, and it makes sense to try to be more efficient and redo the routes, and we're going to save kids some time on the bus. Some won't, of course, the person that used to get picked up for, I get all that, but I mean, this was pretty horrific. And it's still being worked on, and I don't want to beat around the bush and be politically correct here. So I understand we did it in a crunch, and we thought we could do it, and we knew there were going to be problems, and I give everybody credit. The bus drivers came in and tried. Like, I understand, but this was so horrific. My question is, one, really, without sugarcoating it, how long until it's 99% fixed? 2 weeks, I heard 2 weeks. I find that hard to believe. And two, we're sort of blaming software, sort of blaming people coming and going. And three, if I understand correctly, and I'm not blaming you, Mr. Schock, you had consulted for a very large district. And I work for a very large district. So I just still don't feel like I know why this is so bad. And I would like not to sugarcoat it and hear really why it's so bad, if possible. And really, how's it going to get fixed? Are we adding buses? Are we changing routes even more? We did a lot of fixing. There was a lot of mess, and we fixed a lot, but there's still a lot more. I know there's a lot of questions, but I think you know what I'm asking. Can you answer some of that?
We're being pretty cautious with some of our answers because of some of the issues with the routing contract. So I think the best thing, and I'll probably let Dr. Zerbe complete this answer, is that we present something in writing that is more specific in terms of what happened.
Can I
understand. Wrong red button. I understand that, we need to be careful about what we say. I also understand that, when people come and go, you got to be careful about, pointing fingers specifically to any individuals. But the challenge is, this is the second year in a row where the bus schedules have been pretty well messed up, right? And, some people want to blame the administration, some people want to blame First Student, some people probably want to blame me or somebody else. But, when we go to try to make it, there's two aspects to this. Let's continue the fire drills, let's get this resolved. for this school year, but then there's, how do we build confidence that we can do it right in the future? So the goals of this project were good. We're going to probably reduce the student time on the bus by about 20% overall, which is a good thing. And the side benefit was that, there might be some cost savings. The main thing was that we were going to reduce the bus time by 20%. So if we're presented with that type of information again, whether it's towards the end of the school year or going into next school year, how can we feel confident that it's going to happen well, because we can't have another year like this year. We got to be very good at it the next time around. We got to hit it out of the park.
And Mr. President, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're done with starts of school like this, and that's why I'm not suggesting we have an answer to your question here this evening or to anyone else's question, but it's going to take a cooperative effort between us and First Student to sit down and talk about the options available to us and what might be the best path going forward, so that together we can make sure that we don't start a school year off like we did or have any issues similar to this. Because quite frankly, and we've had the conversation with First Student, it's not just an issue of the district, it's also an issue of First Student. What I mean by that, both of our reputations in providing services are on the line. And I think they came forward in a certain time of emergency need just recently to assist us. And I think that that shows some level of commitment to working with and for Methacton. I just need to do my due diligence and come forward to the board with a recommendation so that you clearly understand what the issues are and then what the recommendations are to address those issues. At this point in time, our focus really is on the matters before us and before our families and our children, and we're going to continue working through that. I did say 2 weeks. That is, based on what we know at this time, that is our intent. Could it be longer? It depends on the rate of speed that we make some of these changes. Some of the challenge in our conversations about how to do certain changes is how much disruption are we going to have at one particular moment in time. And so we carefully, want to plan any changes so that we're not making one change, communicating the change, and then 2 days later calling those same families again and saying, oh, by the way, you have another change. So we're trying to be thoughtful, but our intent is to look at some of those long runs and some of the other matters. It may mean that we may need to add more buses back in than what we're currently doing. We haven't. We're not at a point where we're using or suggesting that we're using more buses than we currently or last year have used, but we're at a point where we're considering every possibility to make sure that we're doing our parents and our children just in this process, knowing that it was our fault for not being able to get out the gate in a proper manner that we anticipated. So we're still working through those issues. I think the board and the public deserve additional updates as we move forward. But at this point in time, I think it's important that that you understand where we are and the type of communications that I've already sent out to the public, kind of articulate in general terms the way that we've been thinking through this systematically. And we want to continue to come back and provide, some additional data that really articulates where we're at with the number of bus rides that, are at or near or close or beyond the thresholds that we originally established. So, we originally established a 50-minute threshold in the district, a 60-minute threshold for non-public and private schools in the district, and we're still trying to address some of those because they are problematic, and we're working towards it. And if it takes more than 2 weeks, it takes more than 2 weeks. But that's a target right now. Again, it is a challenge we just can't blow the system up because we still have to transport students while we're trying to make some of these changes. So I know everybody wants answers. certainly I want to have a solution, and I want to bring those things forward to you.
Are we going down the line, or are we, okay, I'll wait.
I have a couple of questions about the presentation. On the line where you say consulting role, one of the things you mentioned was to review the contracts with the transportation contractor and the bus router. Is that an independent contractor, the bus router, or is it an employee of the district?
That was an independent contractor you had.
Okay.
A separate contract since about April.
Okay. And on your charts, which look very informative, the second one shows the Arrowhead AM runs with scatter diagram and shows the number of minutes. Is that the same diagram that you had when you presented to us before, or is this as a result of actual experience?
That's the routes that are in effect as of about a week ago.
Okay, so you have incorporated changes so that if children are on the, so the most in the AM at Arrowhead, according to this, is 31 minutes for a child. 30 some minutes for a child. That looks like the longest bus ride.
Correct, that's Arrowhead.
Yes, okay. And this is an experiential diagram, you're saying, knowing what the children are on the bus.
Okay.
So there could be a disaster on a given day, but in general, this is what it takes for the child to get to school.
This represents the times that the computer says it takes. What we're doing now is pulling the times from the bus GPS system called Zonar and determining whether these times off the computer are correct. Now, when the bus drivers were out testing those times previously, the map was roughly calibrated to be accurate for what the drivers were telling us the times were, and that was done by increasing the load time per student from 10 to 18 seconds per student, which then adjusted the total time of that run to be accurate to what the drivers had tested. But what I'm saying in terms of map calibration, that is a very crude way to deal with it, because a more accurate way would be to say that this road between 7 and 7:30 travels at this speed. In the height of rush hour between 7:30 and 8:30, it's slower. And that is the level of calibration, in addition to locking certain roads down to door side only stops and other things that can be done. But the times you're seeing are the computer times, and we're pulling the Zonar reports to confirm the accuracy of those times.
So there were conversations about this before at a previous meeting, and one of the things that I think was happening after that was that bus drivers were actually doing actual runs. And how have we captured that data? Did it compare to the data that's showing here, which I understand still is not real time because it's not at the time of day that the bus runs would be going?
The drivers tested those runs and were asked to pause at the stop a proper amount of time, and they also made comments concerning certain congested areas at the times that those would be driven. The contracted router had taken all that information and started to put it in the map, but the issue you have with the calibration of the map is that, well, there are a number of issues. One is you don't have certain streets blocked off saying this can't be traveled. And because of that, your turn-by-turn directions aren't correct as they're coming out, creating confusion for the drivers and particularly the substitutes. But all aspects of the map really need to be calibrated as close as possible. There are neighboring districts with very accurate maps, and they can predict accurately to travel well down into Philadelphia with accurate turn-by-turn directions and accurate times from farther distances than this when they take students down to Philadelphia. So that is the level of calibration you need to have a real reliable system. And if you look at this chart that shows in 5-minute increments how the buses are used, that chart cannot be fully trusted until those times are accurate. So we're
That's
still
right.
dealing with the times.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's not in the report, but you mentioned other districts. Why don't we have that kind of a calibrated map?
The systems, this software, there are 4 or 5 packages of software. They all differ. And there is one that First Student uses heavily, as do many others, that produce a report like this colored report of the times right off the computer system. You can drag and drop a run from this bus to another, and it recalculates all the numbers and so forth. That is a more sophisticated piece of software. The map is up to date. Getting an up-to-date map with the latest navigation components and all of the latitude and longitude coordinates in it and so forth is critical, because if your map isn't accurate, you won't know which side of the street that house is on. So the maps of 5 years ago would lead to that confusion. The maps of today, you'd know precisely down to within feet where that house is. So it's the map, these systems work extremely well if the map's calibrated. They require a lot of manual intervention and the potential of losing all that local knowledge from one year to the next if it's not locked into the map.
Thank you. I think that it's important for us to have an understanding of what our goal is from the standpoint of both this year and what do we want to accomplish for next year. What is our specific goal for the district? And I think we need to make sure that we come up with that. We don't have the luxury of a lot of time for this year. Obviously, we have to make it work for the children. But I do think that we should probably very early on decide exactly what our goals are for next year and how we can go about achieving them.
Thank you for the presentation. While I'm appreciative of some of the information that's in this report, I'm kind of looking for more substantial numbers when we're talking about. So how many outstanding issues, and maybe Dr. Zerbe, this gets directed towards you, is, how many outstanding issues are we still talking about? I mean, we know that there was a lot in the beginning, and we got reports back as a board that things are starting to get better. Where are we talking about? Are we talking that we have 50 students, 100 students? How many are safety related versus how many are overcrowded, or how long the bus ride is? I mean, that's information that I think would be more valuable from a board to know where we're at than, kind of ideally what every bus run looks like on a 5-minute increment. I mean, we need to kind of talk about the reality of the situation, I think, as opposed to what we'd like to have it look as. And I guess as a second part to that is...
I mean, that's certainly a good question. That's the exact questions that we're trying to get to. So, for example, Mr. Schock talked about times in the bus software. Well, those times don't necessarily... it's our opinion and opinion of our drivers that the buses or the times in the system don't necessarily aren't necessarily congruent with those times that it actually takes to drive those routes. So what we're trying to do is pull the Zonar reports, and we're going to compare those so that we know that if on a sheet from the transportation software says that we're riding 50 minutes, but the Zonar report says it's an hour and 20. Then we have some work to do there to ascertain whether or not one is more accurate than another. Our thought is that the Zonar reports are certainly more reflective of the actual ride, but we got to look at that data in its totality in terms of, is it on the day, are we looking at it on the day that it had a heavy rain in the morning, like just recently, or is it on a regular day that and over a number of days? So that's what we're working towards, so to get to that extent. But primarily, just so the board understands that all the items that were before us in regards to safety stop matters have been addressed. I believe in conversation earlier or this afternoon, there were a few more that came in that were new, and we're addressing those. And those are our priorities. The next level is to address, there are about 4 to 5 buses that are still arriving late to our schools and to some of the non-public and private schools. That's the next thing that we're trying to address. And then the third level of category that we're trying to address are those that are long bus rides. And so we're starting with the most extreme long bus rides and trying to work our way down. But that takes a more evaluation of the data. So you're absolutely right. The questions are appropriate. We just don't have all that information here for you this evening. In fact, we're still working on ascertaining the appropriate amount of time that's associated with those routes that we perceive to be long, but we're trying to gather additional data on. But once we have that, we can certainly share that back with the board in a future presentation or communication from my office.
The part there where we talk about still having 4 buses that are arriving late, how many buses are we using as opposed to how many we thought we were going to be using? Are we back to prior year numbers, or where are we here?
You're a few less than prior years.
So have we, I mean, I'm sure you've thought of all options here, but do we use more buses to get these kids to school on time? I mean, that is...
That's exactly what I said earlier, and we are considering that. The matter is, we're evaluating, we're not just making changes, just because it appears to be a need for a change. We made the immediate changes on the safety stops. We're processing through some of the other items now, and if it's determined by those that are working on the routing that the only way to fix the matter is to add another bus to it, we'll consider that, and then we'll implement that change if it's the most appropriate way to address it. That hasn't been brought to my attention at this moment in time, but it's not something we're ruling out. So we certainly will consider it. It's just not a matter of throwing more buses at the problem, because the more buses you throw, you need drivers, and that's equally the challenge. So if we're doing that, it'll likely reduce our pool of available drivers if, for instance, a regular driver gets sick. So there's a lot of things to consider, but we're not saying no to additional buses at this point.
Okay. And is the call center still open?
Yes.
It is still open, okay.
And just some anecdotal data on that, the call volume has significantly decreased. They're spending most of their time making calls back to parents regarding the changes that are being made down at in a particular route.
Okay. And I guess my last statement here is kind of just the frustration of the entire process. I mean, as a board, we can only do as good of a job as the information that's presented to us. So I think when we're talking about long-range plans here and how do we do this better, I also think that somehow we have to be comfortable with the data that's being put in front of us. I mean, it's part of our responsibility to do things in the most efficient way possible. And, we were presented with a plan that, looked good on paper, that it looked like it had been vetted, looked like eventually bus drivers, were looped into the process and running these routes. And none of it turned out to be true. I mean, there was failures all across the board. So I think the next question is, how does the board get comfortable, from a standoff point of view with the data that were presented? And how do we go about getting that relationship with whether it's a consultant, whether it's a new transportation manager, or someone within the administration? Because I think that's going to be our biggest struggle is moving into next year. How do we really know that what we're being presented is the best route to go?
On the data that you collected here, is this the first year of collecting data in this manner, as far as very precise, from the garage to the first student pickup, to how long that bus is out, to return to the garage, to the next run? Is this the first time that historical data is being kept that precisely?
No, the routing software always has that time calculated into it. But as drivers came back and said it takes 5 minutes rather than 4 minutes, a 1-minute increment was added to that distance. And that is a crude way to adjust the system that applies only to that route, whereas the better way is to go into the underlying map and say that that 1 minute needs to be reflected in a slower travel speed at that time of day. And then that slower travel speed applies across all buses, not just that one bus. So it's a matter of how you're using the capabilities of the system in terms of the map calibration.
So last year's data, okay, was that just bad data collected to use for this year? For instance, I'll go back to when I was a 16-year-old working at Pizza Hut, okay, and they knew on a particular day around Thanksgiving that you would have to make X amount of pizzas because that was reflected in the last 5 years of making pizzas. So they were able to predict the trend for that particular day on that particular week, and that's how they did all their ordering. That's how they prepped everything for that day. So this year, I would think that if we're going on last year's data, that should have got us off to a better start than what we had this year. Because things don't change that greatly. The question is, what changed so greatly that made it such a problem? You know, for instance, you have road closures, you have light issues. Worcester, particular time in the morning, it is backed up from, it was up above Cedars all the way through to Whitpain. But Skipback was clear, Whitpain was clear, but the lights in Worcester were timed where the traffic was bumper to bumper for miles. Now, the other part is, are they reaching out to the townships or PennDOT to say, look, this is when our bus routes are going, we need longer arrows, we need longer pauses on lights to help that routing issue? For instance, Kriebel Mill Road by the high school here is closed down. If that was open, would that relieve some of our problems as far as timing? But it goes back to, was the historical data from last year, was it just improperly used or not kept?
Because of the way you had adjusted those times by adding a minute or subtracting a minute from stop to stop, that only applied to the routes of last year. If you had calibrated the map, then you would have applied that to any route using that road segment at that time of day. So when someone came in and did a complete rerouting and used the travel speeds of the bus, it overrode those plus or minus 1 or 2 minute increments that were adjusting it previously. So I guess my thinking is what you need to do is look at all the capabilities of the modern software, decide how you're going to implement it, and then who is going to be responsible for creating the routes and how the board might need to look at that routing to be sure it's as effective and efficient as you need. So you have many months to do that. It'd be good to make that decision, in the next few months if possible. And Dr. Zerbe, I think, knows the options and, said he's going to do the due diligence around that decision. And once you decide on the software, then the next question is how are you going to capture all that local knowledge and get it calibrated into the map?
So with this program that we currently have, it's more human-based as far as input, is what you're telling us. It's not something where, every Monday, the first 3 months of school, Mondays are going to be a certain type of traffic, Tuesdays are going to be a certain, so how reactionary is that program to saying, hey, you got to respond a certain way in your routing? So are we looking at the worst case and basing all the schedules that way?
Well, the computer map has the capability to be adjusted for Monday differently than the rest of the week at those specific times of day on those specific roads. It has that capability, but that's, the utmost level of map calibration, and you weren't using the map calibration. You were just using these plus or minus factors to get the route sheets to show up with approximately the correct time.
Okay, so then it comes down to more of a human error, hit or miss type situation versus having that program where it's based on the GPS and the stops. I mean, for instance, UPS, their GPS systems on their vehicles know exactly where they're at, what lane. They're also hooked in with Google, where it's real time. They could see the guy, whether he's wearing a seatbelt or not. If the guy's tires being changed, they know it down to that precise second. So I would say that their program is probably the best in the world, we'll say. But where are we at, and is it that we're just not using the right software, or?
Yours doesn't have quite those capabilities, although those capabilities are becoming available for school bus transportation. These systems are just as your car navigations become more sophisticated, these systems are becoming more sophisticated, and in the 4 or 5 competing companies, they add sophistication to maintain their market share from one year to the next.
Okay, so knowing the issues with calculating these routes, it shouldn't take a whole year. What is your suggestion tonight as far as resolving this problem so it's done in a very timely manner where, we're talking about a couple weeks versus a whole school year? I understand we have to build data, and it makes the system stronger if you have the right program for next year. But what is the solution today?
If I were you, I would make the software decision within the next couple of months, put out a bid and make that decision, reviewing the software capabilities. Then you have to decide who's going to run that software, and in my opinion, that decision needs to be made on the risk of having enough people in the height of the summer to get the work done in case someone gets sick or leaves or whatever else. When you work with the larger companies, you'll have many more people capable of coming in and providing backup.
Do we have anything currently that's recording the trip history on our bus runs? In other words, if bus 1 route, are we recording currently the stops, the traffic, or are we gathering that data now so we have it for next year, or do we have to get that software?
You have the Zonar software, but it's a manual review of that software and putting it into the current Bus Boss software. And so, the later systems of the more sophisticated packages have that ability to take that information directly.
So when we're looking for software, we should be looking for something that is more automated, that will automatically do that, rather than put the human element of, whether someone's going to actually get that done because they're here today or sick tomorrow. Is that something that we should look at so we don't run into this problem regardless of who's working for us?
Yeah, I would certainly make the investment in the best software because it will save dramatically in the labor involved.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to do my best to stay calm through this, but I have to say I can't even begin to express the level of frustration that I have in how this whole process has gone down. I think that we, as a board and as a district, owe an apology to the families that were inconvenienced and the drivers that were inconvenienced and the problems that arose out of this situation. I don't know where the blame falls, but I do know that we had a job to do and we didn't do it. And so for that, I'd like to apologize to all of the families that were affected by this. In August, we saw this presentation and we were told that this job could be done. We were given every assurance that all of the routing, everything that needed to happen, could happen in a timely manner. according to what I'm hearing tonight, there were personnel changes that led to a condensed timing in all of the routing that had to be done. Were there personnel changes since August that impacted the timing?
There were changes with the capability of the routing company.
Okay. One of the things that I seem to recall from one of the presentations was that we were told that bus stops were not going to change. According to what I'm hearing from parents, they did. Why did that happen?
When I was watching the router do the routing, and we had a first student staff member with us that day, they were being very careful on to review the prior year's stop, particularly if it was a door-side stop or a house stop. Now, we assumed that they were using that same diligence throughout the rest of the process, but apparently that did not occur, and they were using, for new students, let's say the new fifth grade students going into Skyview that were not there the prior year, they used an automated way to find the closest stop that had been used by Skyview in the past, not necessarily the stop that that student had the prior year. So it was a Skyview stop they were using, but not the stop that that student had.
So we didn't have any students changing their bus stop that were staying within the same school. So a student who was at Eagleville last year and at Eagleville this year, their bus stop was not changed.
That is what we were told. Now, I don't have all of the information to say that that's exactly true, but that's the direction that they were given, and that's what we witnessed them doing as they prepared the routing.
Okay. My second question here, I guess, this was a massive undertaking, I acknowledge that. Did you have all of the tools and resources that you needed in order to get this task done? Did you have the personnel? Did you have the information? Did you have the equipment? Was all of this provided to you? Were there any areas where cooperation, communication broke down that should be addressed?
Once again, I'm going to be careful in this forum of saying certain things because I, first of all, don't think it's particularly helpful. I do think the school board is owed a detailed explanation of what occurred here, and you can have my perspective in the administrations and first students, and you might want the bus routers as well. There'd be possibly different perspectives on that because I think that would help you going forward. But in this forum, I'm not interested in detailing some of what happened.
I guess I'm not really asking what, I'm just asking a yes or no. Did you have everything that you needed?
As the presentation indicates, routing is very critical to all aspects of the efficiency, and the routing has to be done with the local knowledge built in. We did have good ways of getting that local knowledge. What we didn't have was timely delivery of the final routes.
Okay. One of the questions that I wanted to ask, Mike already sort of alluded to, so we don't know at this time how many routes or stops or students are still experiencing issues, is that correct? We can't quantify that?
I don't have that number for you this evening.
Are there any families that are still awaiting a phone call?
There are certainly some families that are awaiting responses to some outstanding matters about when we plan to address certain things. But primarily, most of the calls that needed to be returned have been returned. The call center was well staffed. The call center was well organized, and we had it. Initially, it was flooded. Okay, so I mean there were instances where people didn't get through, but as time has gone on, we've kept the tickets, we've followed back up with parents, we've used our electronic system, and we certainly have called a majority of those that have called us, and we responded. Has every parent been called back? I don't know if I can do that. If I can quantify how many weren't, but for the majority, yes.
Do we have a timetable for how long we can tell parents they should wait before they should try calling again? I mean, are we returning phone calls within 24 hours, 48 hours? I don't want parents just sitting around waiting for a call back and somehow their message got lost.
No, that's a fair statement. We've been turning calls back within 24 hours, 48 hours, depending on the issue and whether or not we have a reasonable response to their complaint or their concern.
So at this point, the call center was slated to be closed September 11th, I believe. Is that correct?
That may have been the date we originally anticipated. We're keeping it open, I believe, for another week and a half for sure. It may be longer, depending on where we're at with the process, because we need, we feel that it's much better for us to make personal calls to families and making sure that they have the information they need in order to comprehend the changes that we're making. But we'll keep that on as long as we feel that it's necessary based on the need.
Okay, and then my last question is, what is the maximum ride time for a student right now?
We're like I said earlier, we have two sets of data that we're going through. We're going through the data that's coming out of the routing software, and we're waiting for, and I think we received later this afternoon, a specific snapshot from Zonar, and I didn't have a chance to go through the report, so my team hasn't gotten together to look at the Zonar report and compare that to the BusBoss report. So until we do that, it could be an hour and 20 minutes in one piece of data, but it could be less than that based on the Zonar report. So that's what we need to sift through at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. I want to be respectful, and it's not a Watergate hearing, but I also want to make sure that it doesn't come across as grandstanding. But I must say, first of all, I take responsibility because I voted for this. I didn't vet it out well enough, so I apologize for the effect it's had. I'm a little disappointed that you're not. The tone of the conversation has changed from we to you need to decide. You've changed your pronoun in this process. So from the responsibility perspective, there's some things that we started to have in March from a deliverable perspective of what we expected for deliverables that we, as Mike mentioned, were put on a path for. But I don't see some of those deliverables even in the end of the day. So for example, the August 1st recommendation for final routes. So if that's a recommendation coming from a consultant after we made those final routes after August 1st, then in July you should have told us we needed to postpone this from a consulting perspective. The bus stops were not supposed to change. We specifically asked about the bus stops changing. And watching somebody over the shoulder, from my perspective, you promised bus stops were not changing. These were the parameters and the assumptions that we were making. So, I know Chris would probably relate to this, but from a Six Sigma perspective, you have to do a measurement system analysis. You need to know if you have good data. We did not evaluate if we had good data in the process, early enough in the process to evaluate to make these changes. Shame on me for not asking that type of question, because that's where we're at. We have made faulty decisions off of faulty data. But the first thing you need to decide is that the data can be trusted, to Mike's point. No matter how it gets communicated, we didn't do the proper job of evaluating if the data that we had in the system, no matter if it's in BusBoss or another system, was put in a thorough understanding of, do we have all the students in there? Do we have them in the right spots? Do we understand that on this chart here, that 5 minutes leeway to get to another school does not provide enough time for the second bus run to Skyview or Arcola to be fulfilled? I mean, I'm frustrated from a perspective of ownership. You provided processes changes, but the processes seem to to break down immediately once we had a crisis. The bus utilization from a perspective of understanding how to get the most out of those buses is what we were trying to do. We were trying to do it based on getting the most effective. We've been told that there's some buses that go into Arcola that have 15 kids on it. That does not seem effective. So we looked at the evaluation of having more kids on that bus. It may mean that some of the students have to take longer times, but the idea was efficiencies. So what we talked about in March and what we talked about in May and what we got delivered here is not jiving. So from that perspective. The last question I have is, in the short term, since we don't know if we are going to have additional buses, two things. One, I would love to see this effectiveness evaluation based on, if it's based on theoretical or based on actual. So at some point we would like that. But I would also like to see, my guess, I predict, that Arrowhead is probably the best performing one. So if Arrowhead's the best predicting one, it's not really fair for us to see this one example when Skyview could be completely, or Worcester could be completely different than that. One last, Dr. Zerbe, as a suggestion, since we do have a few buses, I'm not sure what the number is, that are less than, and we have continuously late buses going into school, can't we insert, if somebody's running a run for the high school and they're dropping off, and that bus is continually late into the high school, and that's causing a domino effect related to Arcola or Skyview, which causes a domino effect to Worcester. Can we insert a bus in the middle in the short term that doesn't really require a communication change to the parents? It's just going to be a different bus. It might have a different bus number temporarily. You could call it the same bus number with a little pen or something. But it would allow the principle of stopping the domino effect with changes that may need to be made, and we're not really committing to additional buses at this, obviously on a daily basis we are, but we haven't really vetted out the full effect. So I spoke too much. I'm frustrated in the process, and you're welcome to respond to anything I said.
No comment at this point.
Well, it looked like I get to bring up the end of everything, huh? Not much left to say, huh? We've gotten apologies, rightly so, from the board. I voted for the bus routes, quote-unquote bus routes, which they weren't. They were the stops. Little did we know that those stops changed, or now were being changed, even after we voted for them. There's tons of blame to go around. Everybody's got it on their shoulders here. Everybody at this table, everybody at the podium, everybody. Sounds like we have a lot of work to do, starting with the bus routing services. Calibration of our computer maps sound like they were poor at best. Bad timing of delivery of the final report routes, all spells disaster. To me, you have to understand, Mr. Schock, if I understand you being a consultant in this matter and you saw some of this stuff happening, the trigger should have been pulled and this whole operation should have been suspended immediately, and we're going back to the original bus routes. Don't know what that would have entailed with first student or the drivers. Really don't care at this point. We had kids standing on quarters for hours at the wrong bus stops, not getting picked up. It was a mess. My family was very fortunate. Very fortunate. We didn't have virtually any problems at all. In fact, as of today, my son is only one of 9 kids on his bus. 9, that's it. And I'm sorry, I must be getting older. I can't read these reports too well. Didn't bring my spectacles with me. One last thing. I'm deeply disappointed in this report. It's incomplete. Does not tell us what happened. Does not tell us what the cause was. The next time I hear a transportation report, and I'm just speaking for me, not my fellow board members, I want to see and hear what happened from the start to finish. I got bits and pieces, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and I realize that we can't talk about some things. But some things have to be talked about. The public is owed an apology on this and reasoning. It may, it may come to the point where, hey, you know what? There's something going wrong with this whole system, or there may be someone to blame, or there was negligence involved. Who knows? I don't know. I'm just throwing this stuff out. All I know is we can't let it happen again. And I know I will not support anything having to do with bus routes or anything unless we are concrete, 100% sure it's going to work. And I understand there's changes that happen. Kids come into the district within a week before school. Okay, they move here, they got to sign up, they got to get in. But our systems should be able to handle this like that. Should be able to plug them in, boom, assign them to this bus. Okay, whoop, that bus is going to be overcrowded now. Let's pop another route. Let's run this route. Okay, the software should be able to do this. So anyway, without belaboring this, that's all I have to say.
Chris, so we don't have to read between the lines on a lot of this stuff, and I know it deals with personnel. Can we set up an executive session next week, have the consultant there, give us the, the unfiltered facts where we're not worried about any legal issues with the solicitor, so we're not violating anything far as if there's employees involved, or, instead of dancing around the facts, I know you'd probably like.
I was thinking the same thing, Jim.
So
I don't know if we can get it in next week, but I was thinking, do an executive session where we can talk very candidly about everything to understand, because, it's hard for us to understand how to move forward if we don't really understand what are the root causes and what's all that. I will say that as a professional statistician, I feel like I was duped. So the next time we go around with trying to make this, everybody is going to have to prove to me in the data, and I have to see all the data and understand all the data and feel comfortable in all the data before I would even consider a vote on anything in the future. So people need to prove to me that the bus stops didn't. And it has to be in a statistically meaningful way to me before I would even consider making any decisions in the future on this. We've messed this up too much for several years that we can't have it happen again. All right, I think we've talked enough about that.
Does the public get to comment about this, since the public has been affected by this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a work session, I think this is
Yeah, no, you'll definitely get to comment on it. I just don't know, based on the agenda, if it's right now or in a few minutes, okay?
I think since it's timely, you're discussing it now, so wait until the end of the meeting to comment. You should hear from the people in the public if they have a comment. They have a right to be heard.
I agree.
And it's a public meeting, so.
You have a choice to either allow them to speak at the end of the meeting as the agenda so suggests, or you can choose to allow them to speak on this matter now, and just on this matter now. That's what you choose to do.
You know what? I'm all for hearing exactly what the public has to say right now, because we can do whatever we want. So anybody who wants to comment on the transportation right now, please come up. But keep it to that, and then all other comments will be at the other time in the meeting, okay?
Good evening, Bob Andorn, Worcester. Bob Andorn. Try as I might, I was completely unable to practice my what I had written anywhere near 3 minutes, so I will formally send that to all of you. And I've chosen to take some of the comments that you've made at this meeting and incorporate them. So I didn't hear anybody wanting to accept responsibility for this. As a consultant, which I am at times, anything that anybody remotely related to me under me does wrong, it's my fault. And I take responsibility for that. And all I hear is just this, well, I don't know what I should say, and I need to be careful about that. No one's accepting responsibility. So without the responsibility, your problem's not going to be fixed. So you've taken a system that, at best, needed some tweaking, and you've created a colossal morass. Insert any adjective you want for that. I can take my phone and go someplace that I've never been before and get there on time. So you have all of this analytics and data and everything else. That's not your problem. Your problem is having somebody who has some common sense and can interpret that and understand what that means and then utilizing it properly. I've never, 15 years I've been in the district, never had anything this messed up. You need somebody who can practically implement the information that's there. Looking at all of this data will mean nothing. You have to understand what it means. I don't care how many people are on buses. Today, out of 10 days, my son has gotten to school late. When I say late, school started. He's not getting to homeroom. School has started. That's not fair to him or anybody else on the bus. This board and anybody who's responsible needs to take the bull by the horns and get this fixed. My bigger concern is if you're somehow suggesting that getting our kids to school is the most difficult part of educating them, then we need to be talking about a completely different picture. This is an exercise of understanding who, where, when, and why. You guys have known about it for months. Changing personnel, changing people getting on stops makes no difference. We've been driving kids to school for decades. And then all of a sudden, we're going to save time and money, and we've done the complete opposite. This board said we can't close a school because the numbers don't support it. Therefore, we have approximately the same number of students. Just from a layperson standpoint, how can you save 20% time on a bus and reduce the number of buses with the same number of students? It's impractical. More buses, less time. Less buses, more time. It's common sense. And just, somebody had made the comment that you're falling short, that you fell short. Yes, you fell short. You're falling short because these are continuing problems. They need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed now, and they need to be addressed effectively. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Malik, Worcester. I agree with Bob, and I kind of disagree with Bob. Mr. Winters, I have to compliment him because he did, I think, take responsibility for what happened. But the rest of you, I don't think, really grasp your responsibility as board members because the buck stops with you guys, you know. I think somebody referred to this as a massive undertaking. I think listening to what I heard described, it's a huge undertaking. Complex, computers, input, all kinds of craziness going on. Sounds to me like it's a massive undertaking. And my question to you is, if you could answer it, did anybody get the bus driver's input on this? What did they have to say about it? Were they happy with it? Did they want it? Were they receptive to it? Because you got to think about this from all perspectives. You know, you got to have the bus drivers on board. You got to train the bus drivers. They have to be happy with it, comfortable with it, you know, because you're thinking about the computer input, you know, people looking over people's shoulders. But then the bus drivers have to be comfortable with it, have to know how to do the inputs, outputs, data, like you said. I mean, and that's another factor. Then you have the administrative role on top of that. The conduit between the bus drivers and the administrators and the tech people. And the complexity in that is just unbelievable. And my question is, was there any training? Who did the training? Was that taken into account? Who trained the bus drivers? How much training was done? Who considered that training? Who trained the IT people? Who trained the people who, you know, input the data? Who was watching those folks? Who double-checked the input? I mean, who was watching all this stuff? Practice and trial runs. Were there any practice and trial runs? Was any of that stuff done? I mean, and how'd they go? How'd the practice and trial runs go? Because if you did have practice and trial runs, they should have picked up the errors in your data. Did it pick up the errors in the data? Well, when were the trial runs?
At least some of those errors, I can't speak about them, but trial runs were run and pointed out some of the issues.
Well, obviously there weren't enough trial runs because it sounds to me like it was a mess. So, obviously, I don't think there was enough oversight from the board because this is a massive blunder. I mean, it sounds like I've heard people refer to it as just a debacle, blunder, massive blunder. So, you know, it all comes from the top because you guys are the ones that authorize everybody to do everything else. So, lesson learned, something this complex needs to be overseen. You just can't just let it run free. That's just my opinion, so thanks.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Candy Alaba, Eagleville. I remember standing here in July and saying there was going to be some of these problems. And I'm not a school board director. I'm a parent and a resident of the township who has sat in this room for years and heard of traffic problems. I don't blame Mr. Schock for this. He was hired to do a job. He presented the information. You took the information in July and you ran with it. You rushed it. First off, the board needs to take responsibility and the administration, and you owe an apology to the bus drivers. No one else but the bus drivers, because I have heard for the last 3 weeks the most horrible things said about the bus drivers in this school district, and it's wrong. I put 2 kids through here. I depended on these bus drivers to get my children to school safely, and they did for a total of 26 years. Unfortunately, when the district made the decision to sell the transportation department, they lost a lot of loyal and qualified bus drivers. Now, you want to change routes, you want to do things. Why don't you wait for your enrollment projections to come in first before you start changing bus routes and dropping buses and dropping bus drivers or putting in full-day kindergarten? This is going to wind up costing the taxpayers money. And it's still, we're going into the 3rd week, and parents' children are still not getting to school on time or being picked up or getting lost somewhere. I think that's unconscionable. That's embarrassing for this school district, considering we had an excellent reputation when it came to transportation. But you rushed this. This was something that you should have taken your time with, worked out all the kinks, and started at the beginning of the next school year. I shouldn't have to be standing here saying this. This is a common sense thing. But I am insulted that the bus drivers are being blamed for this. They were left out of the equation completely. They should have been the first ones that were brought in on this and get the expertise. And somebody needs to explain to me, how did the transportation department schedule bus stops before they had computers? How did they do a good job? And there was problems at the beginning of the school year, but you know what? It was taken care of within a week or 2. This has become one of the biggest bigger blunders this school district has had. I mean, I'm just surprised this room isn't full of parents. The parents should all be here instead of complaining on social media. But what I've seen for the last couple weeks is the blame going to the bus drivers, and that's not fair. And I want to thank Mr. Winters for taking responsibility. You stepped up. You own this. And the thing is, but I want to know, in the long run, how much is this going to cost the taxpayers? Because most of us who don't have children in the school district, and I don't anymore, are left out of the equation when all this happens. And we have an opinion about this. And, I mean, I ran into someone I knew last week that does not live in the school district that knew all about the busing problem. And they were laughing. They couldn't believe that Methacta went in and fixed something that wasn't broken. Like I said, you could have sat down with Mr. Schock, made tweaks, and taken your time. I stood here in July and said, how do you think this is going to work when you rush it? Within, you had 4 to 5 weeks? And to get the parents on board and get the parent, I don't know what you're thinking, but I don't know how you're going to fix this, but it has to be fixed. Winter is coming. And what's going to happen when buses are late? Last week, the one thing I said, what happens if there's an accident on 422? Not only one in the morning, there was 2. The second one was caused by the first one, between Valley Forge and St. Gabe's. And Audubon was stopped. It was gridlock because of the traffic, and the buses were stuck, and the kids were late again. This is something that's not in a computer program. This is something that people that live here know this happens. And this is a regular occurrence on 422, and it affects Lower Providence directly. And what affects Lower Providence winds up affecting Worcester, and the kids are late. My only question, has any children arrived to school on time since school started? Because I get the impression they haven't. They're losing class time. I mean, education's important. They need to be there in time, and they need to get home in time. I wouldn't want to have to worry where my child was an hour after they're supposed to be home, because that's a very scary feeling, not knowing where your child is. So I suggest you need to do something. I don't know what you're going to do. Non-student members of the public were let in on this, but this is a problem you need to fix immediately, because it can't go on any longer. We don't know what this winter's going to be like. We've had bad winters here, and that'll create more problems.
Good evening. I'm Teresa Priette, and I'm a bus driver. The one thing I want to stress to everybody is, last year, everything worked fine. We had our children on our buses. They were not overcrowded. And everybody, especially in our district, got to school on time. I'm sure if you listened over our radio, there are certain things that happen. We run into accidents. We have bad weather. The one nice thing about the way our schedules were before, we drive machines. We drive mechanical machines. Sometimes our drivers, we run into a problem on the road with a bus. Well, we put it out over the radio. And any of the drivers that are within our area that are doing our schools, you have a few extra minutes where you can help go pick up these other students, that they're not waiting because that bus is having a mechanical problem. We don't have that anymore. We barely have enough time to get them to school. It's not happening like it did before. I've been a driver here for 8 years. I went to this school. I graduated from this school. I have children that graduated from this school. And I've never seen anything like this, even in the 8 years that I've been driving here. Dr. Zerbe, you saw me the first day when I came around that corner. I was so stressed out that, in all honesty, I felt like I could have walked in and handed my keys back. And I'm sure there's a lot of other drivers that felt the same way. If you want to know what's going to work on a run, you ask our office staff, because Mary Beth Pastino has taken care of it for a long, long time. She's now correcting it. Ask a driver. I did my run the very first day. I got to Arcola 35 minutes late. I couldn't even do my Eagleville run. They had to get another driver to do my Eagleville run. That's not how us drivers work. We all help one another, and we're there for one another. We can't do things, though, the way this has all been revamped. We have parents that miss bus drivers because they've taken our runs and they've completely chopped them apart. So most of us all have new children. We have new parents. The new parents don't know who we are. I don't know what you did, but this year it's not working. We're doing everything we can to try to make it work. I went home after the first night when I saw you, Dr. Zerbe. I sat down for 2 hours on my own, and I reorganized my whole Arcola run. I had to put my stops in different places to be able to make my run work, because the way it was handed to me didn't work. So if you want input, involve your drivers, because they're the ones out there on the road doing this. Thank you.
Karen Bickelman. I just want to thank Paul Winters and Kim for shouting out, saying that the school board and the district owes the public an apology. The route that I have this year, I chose because I anticipated the problems with the new routing. I'm a little sad that I did choose the new route because I've driven a run for 4 years. I have a great rapport with I had a great rapport with the parents and the students. And now I see them and they tell me how bad they miss me. And this all is a result of the consultants' work, their rerouting, whatever. So I just wanted to express that because it's, you know, all the drivers that have had runs for years and years, you have that rapport, and now it's lost. So you have to reestablish that with the new parents, which would happen. But the other thing that's important too, the kids that I've had for 4 years, and I heard this today, you know how to handle them behavior-wise. They respect you. You have control of the bus ride. A lot of the buses now with new drivers, they have to get acclimated with the new students' behavior and all that kind of stuff too. So that is lost with all the changes, with all the different drivers going on to different runs. They have to reacquaint themselves with their new students and the parents, and then the behaviors, you know, on the bus to have control of the bus. So I feel bad with what transpired this year, because I probably would have liked to have the bus run that I had last year with the same students. So it all starts at the top. It came through the district, and, you know, I think you should take ownership of that. Thank you.
John Andrews, Lower Providence. I hope the rest of the meeting goes better because I've done a lot of head shaking this evening. And I came up to the podium a few meetings ago saying that, you know, you didn't meet schedule. There was a schedule put out February, March. It wasn't followed. And I ended up saying, you know, maybe you should just this year run new routes for, let's say, just elementary, and keep the old routes for the higher grades. But But, I'm just a member of the public. I'm a person who presented the facts relative to the need for Skyview and was ignored, although I was not ignored for a while by PDE. I spoke up at a committee meeting recently asking, what's the plan for the big snowstorm this year? Do we have a contract? And I didn't hear anything. We had a big snowstorm last year, and we spent, I don't know, $70,000, when if we had a contract, it would have been maybe $25,000. Plus, it would have been done on time. So and relative to the Fields project, which I objected to rather strenuously up to the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania.
Mr. Andrews?
I just want to finish up on this one point.
Well, the point of the discussion right now is to provide comment related to the transportation, but general comments about everything else would be at the end of the meeting.
Well, I think there's a pattern here. And, relative to the Fields project, I said at one point, maybe year one we do the stormwater management, and then year two we do the Fields improvement. Well, we still don't have the stormwater management done. We are using the fields, but, we get an 8-inch rainfall day, and we're going to have problems downstream big time. So I think that you need to get a hold of the root problems, and when I wrote that out originally this evening, I used the spelling of R-U-T-E, but then I corrected it to R-O-O-T. I just don't have a feeling as to how you're going to get to a point of having more efficient bus routes. Clearly, last year, you made a judgment that efficiency could be improved, and you don't have a way to get there at this point. I wish you a lot of luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments related to the bus? Okay, then let's move along.
Okay. So on the agenda for next week, we have M Awards for Academic Achievement for the high school. Ms. Landis will be presenting that. The Home and School Coordinating Council, Ms. Wilkerson will be presenting an update on the Coordinating Council status. Also for next week, we'll have the appointment of new student board representatives. The board will also report on committee work and the approval of the minutes from the previous meetings will be meeting a vote. Under number 10, fiscal items, the list of bills, treasury reports, and student activity accounts are items that we're seeking your approval on next week. Are there any questions related to the list of bills, treasury report, or student activity account at this time? If not, then we'll go on to number 11, personnel items. Dr. Harney, would you please address the board with those and seek any questions that they may have?
Absolutely. For next week's vote, we'll be looking for your approval for one classified resignation. We have one professional employment for next week. We have 11 classified employments for next week. We have one employment long-term substitute classified next week. We have 3 change of status classified. We have 1 uncompensated leave professional for your approval. We have 1 uncompensated leave classified for your approval. We have 5 supplemental contracts for approval next week. We're asking for 4 additions to our casual on-call or classified substitute list. We're asking for the approval of the listed volunteers. We have 1 community education employment for next week. We have 7 advisements for next week. Any questions on any of the items?
Thank you, Dr. Harney. Next on the agenda would be item 12, curriculum and programs. Currently, there's no items for your review for next week. Under 13, policy, there are 8 items under first reading, and for your vote, there are 7 second reading policies for your approval. Are there any questions on matters related to the first or second readings associated with those on the agenda?
Yes, I have one.
All right.
I'd like the policy committee to review policy 229 and remove it from second reading. I believe that it is needs a little bit more work. There is it's a very specific policy, and I believe it was brought forth in good intentions to help, to consider the health and welfare and the safety of the students. But I'd like to see the actual policy be more definitive as to what the students can and cannot do, specifically with working, fundraising events, for instance, like car washes and things like that. What I would hate to see is this put in the discretion of 1 or 2 people who may say, oh, well, you can't do this at all, or you can't do this at all, and then have that event be prohibited. So I think, for instance, if you're talking about, as a specific example, with having car washes, because I don't know how many, but I would venture to say maybe a dozen groups throughout the high school you have car washes, have them have a specific language in there as to where the kids can stand. For instance, are they allowed to go on the corners and hold signs? Are they allowed to can? Or maybe they're not allowed to can. You have it a little bit more meat to this thing, okay? I don't want to see any group be, have this stopped because of this, and I think that just a little bit more work on this would be good, rather than having it put into the hands of a building principal. I just don't think that's proper. Anything?
Well, I mean, I can respond to some of that based on our discussion at the policy meeting regarding this policy. The intention in the revision of this policy was to keep it from being too specific and too restrictive, because there could be other possible scenarios of fundraising opportunities where students could be unintentionally put in harm's way. So the intention with the language that we added was to allow for safety considerations to be a factor in what fundraising can be done. Specifically, I will say that one of the reasons that language was added was to eliminate the canning at car washes. It is a huge safety concern. It's questionable as to the legality of it in Pennsylvania, and it's something that I personally brought up as part of policy, that I wanted to see it stopped. But as far as putting specific language in there as to what students can and can't do, that's something that, as a general rule, I try not to do in policy, because that's not how policy, in my mind, should be written.
So what was the result of the superintendent's action as to the directive that was issued out to the AD regarding canning and on this type of activities? What did we do?
So what I did as responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of all of our students and staff, after having this discussion in terms of this being a matter of policy, and that there was a concern, at least from one, possibly other members of the board, I did take action, contacted the athletic director, and I told the athletic director to inform those groups that are using canning and stepping onto the streets to stop that activity, and that he would then work with those groups to determine what other alternatives or other specific means need to be addressed in order to maintain access to fundraising, and at the same time maintain the safety of our students. So I'm not certain at this point whether or not any additional dialogue has occurred with the groups, but it was, I think it was specifically enacted or that director was inactive for last Saturday, I think it was started, or the Saturday before that. I can't recall exactly,
Right.
but I have an email to it. So it started on a Saturday.
Right, and so that's leading me to my point. I believe the athletic director prohibited any activities involving any kids going on any street corners at all. I believe that's what the email said. So if you do that, you effectively shut down some types of, events. Now, I agree that perhaps the canning is something that should be done and maybe taken as a line item in here, and saying that the district, prevents, organizations are prohibited from canning or asking for money or soliciting for money from street corners. However, I don't believe that they should be, prohibited from, trying to advertise or trying to get people to respond to their events. And that's what you effectively did, is stop that from happening, okay? With a broad stroke of the AD's, email, it shut everything down. And that's what I think needs to work on, because while the intention is good and warranted, I don't think, being such a broad stroke is not in the best interest of all the groups.
I think your statements are fair, and it was an immediate response to addressing the issue. I think the AD also was directed, I know he was directed because I did it, to seek input from those groups that are impacted so that we could work on a more definitive set of guidelines associated with it. And so the issue in general was the safety of the students. To solve a problem that I knew could potentially be before us in the coming Saturday, I removed that problem completely. But we did open the door for dialogue about identifying what those guidelines can be in order to allow access to fundraising at the same time keeping the safety of our children at the forefront.
Well, I'd like to be involved in those discussions as well, having been heavily involved with the marching band and having seen this and having worked these events. I do know that there is a need for some type of guidelines to be gone over, because kids are kids. They're not going to think clearly. They could walk into a street easily and not even look to the right when the car's coming to the left. So and that's why for instance, when the marching band does things, there's always adults present on every street corner. Whenever there's a kid there, there's an adult there, okay? So that's simple policy that we have is when we run the car washes, is something that is, goes without saying. No kids can actually leave the car wash location at all to go anywhere without an adult supervision or an adult escort. So simple things like that.
I think your points are well taken. What I'll do in the essence of, addressing these issues, because I think it's important that we don't leave opportunities shut out of being able to raise funds, but at the same time addressing the issue. I will contact Mr. Spiewak, and he'll recommunicate with those groups that are affected and try to seek input, whether it's through a meeting or through some electronic means, to come up with some more definitive guidelines. Rather than bringing, the policy in and of itself, and the first request was to pull the policy back. I think the policy, is properly addressing the fact that these things have to, comply to some reasonable safety standards. And as such, while they don't articulate every particular activity of fundraising and what's safe and not safe, that's where the administrative guidelines come in, and that's where this process comes in. So your original request to remove 229, are you okay with moving forward with 229, knowing that Mr. Spiewak will be communicating with groups here in the very near future to create a committee to define the guidelines, is the question that I have. Unless other members of the board think that we ought to pull the policy back. I'm just trying to find out.
No, I kind of agree, Dr. Zerbe, with the way that you stated that, because it really is two different things. We're talking board policy, and we were very broad in the definition that we did and what we were allowing and not allowing, versus an administrative regulation. And that tends to be, the administration's side for the detail of every little event, whether it's we're only talking about one. There's plenty of other fundraisers that people do, and to put each and every one along with the regulations and safety precautions and everything into the policy, I think is not the way that our policy system is designed. I do completely agree that it should be an administrative regulation, and to Mr. Roth's point, he's been heavily involved with the band, that, I think people who are involved in these programs can hopefully be involved in the process of coming up with what is an acceptable regulation.
Mr. Roth, you made the request to pull 229 back. Are you okay us moving forward with 229, given the fact that we're going to move with administrative regulations?
Well, I'd like to see something in there regarding the administrative regulations then, that the policy would fall back and allow that. Right now, all you have is the power of the superintendent or designee shall establish rules and regulations to implement this policy. And I don't know, I'm not comfortable with that.
I will say that generally speaking is how most of our policies are structured. Policy is designed to be...
Oh, I know, Kim. I've sat on the policy committee. I know how it works.
Well, my point...
But what I'm trying to get is to prevent something from happening that happened again. So in other words, a broad stroke was given to administration, and it was shut down. And I don't think that's right. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Let the policy go, but I want to see something go on this, because at one time, and Dr. Zerby, this is when you first came on, we had something regarding a policy that was so ridiculous that we had to deal with it, okay? And it was incredibly ludicrous, and we dealt with it, okay? And that's what I mean. That's why and I've always said that board policy is so important to have it right. And I commend the policy committee and Dr. Zerby for going through this, because quite frankly, the first 3 or 4 years I was on the board, the policy committee basically consisted of like 3 board members sitting here after a meeting saying, okay, yeah, this one's good, and that was it. I mean, there were 15-minute meetings, okay? So now that they're actually going and being reviewed, it's a very good thing. I'm just saying that this one, I just don't want to see things shut down that shouldn't be shut down. That's all.
I understand your point. We'll form a committee and get the input necessary to create the guidelines. Okay. Right. Are there any other comments on any items for first reading or for second reading?
Yes. On 251, it's the homeless students. Now, as I read through the policy, I understand helping out people that are homeless and educating them and making those things happen. What I'm looking at this as, if the trend in this country is that we're going to take hundreds of thousands of refugees, okay, will they fall under this policy as living as migratory children? How's all the refugees, how's our policies handle that? I mean, because if we're looking at enrollment studies, okay, and we'll say the federal government says, hey, look, you have a lot of space to utilize, and they come in and they say, we're going to put 1,000 students in your district, in your school district, because you have the buildings and the capabilities and the financial. How's this affect us? I mean, how does the federal government handle us? Do they look at our policies and say, this is what's happening, and this is what you're going to do?
It's an interesting point, Jim, but you're asking us to, how does our policy address something that's not defined by the federal government yet?
Well, for instance, how many students in the district don't have Social Security numbers? I know we can't say, whether people are homeless, whether they're, what their status of a citizenship is, but in the district, how many students have no social security number that we give ID numbers to, or, that's not mentioning children by names. It's not bringing anything that says who the person is, what their demographics are. But when I look at this homeless policy, I understand people that live in the area, they fall under this. Yes, we got to take care of those people as far as education. But, I'm just looking down the road. Here we are looking at our enrollment studies, looking at potentially school closures, but are other people looking at that? And if they pump in 500 students, 1,000 students, the taxpayers here have to take that burden. And I want to know how our policies are affected, or do our policies open the door, close the door to that? How's it all work, since we're on the policy section of?
So to answer a couple of your questions, first of all, we do not collect Social Security numbers when we enroll the child. It's not a requirement, and it's something we don't collect. So to answer your question, I wouldn't be able to tell you how many we have. I'm assuming we'd have 0. Okay. But again, it could have been over a period of 12 years, that maybe 12 years ago we may have been collecting it. But typically that's not what we do today, and that's not what we should be doing. In terms of this policy, this is really a policy that's dictated to us. I mean, it's based on law. It's not anywhere in here that I can recall that we injected any specific additional information. So this is, a template from PSBA which follows the regulation, and so it defines what if anybody comes to us and claims that they're homeless students, we use this information on this policy as a way to determine whether they're classified as that, and if they are, then they get certain services that are available to homeless students specifically.
So this is a new policy brought down by the PSBA.
It's not new. This is
actually 2006. Yeah. But what changes have been made to it from the last?
I don't think we made any changes.
There's nothing in there that has changed. The discussion at the policy committee meeting was that because the bulk of this policy is based on state and federal statutes, we were not going to make any changes at this time.
Now, as far as what would our solicitor say, as far as policies that come down from the PSBA, do we have to blindly adopt them? Can we, I want to know how it impacts our district. I worry that, yes, under this policy here, like I said, I don't mind taking care of people that live in our community that are hurting. But if this is coming down from the federal government or from the state, and they have an agenda to bring in 500 refugees into our community that our taxpayers are going to have to take up, and they slip this policy in, what are the legalities in that situation? If we adopt, I just want to know from a solicitor standpoint of how this.
Well, the fact is that this policy is currently in effect today, and so regardless of whether or not we adopt this policy, the district is bound by the homeless regulations, and I as a superintendent would have to follow those regulations. This policy just supports that. So the law in of itself dictates what I need to do in terms of addressing whether they're called resident homeless students, or in your case, other students that maybe you consider them refugees that come in. If they fit into the definition of homeless student, then they will be treated as such.
So my next question is, if the public wanted to know if the federal government was dropping in refugees into our community that we had to pay to educate, how does the public know that? Like, how do they say, this is how much a year it's costing us? I mean,
I don't know. I would know. I certainly would. The first indication from me would be that our enrollment office has a lot of appointments, and those appointments would be, we would get that filtered up through the central office, and we would be apprised that we have a lot of appointments that would be unusual for a particular period of time. And therefore, we would then look at that information and then determine whether or not, it fits some kind of pattern or some kind of, pattern. I haven't given much thought to that, but that's what likely would happen. Typically,
I'd like to table this for now, and if something does change, we'll have an in-depth discussion and talk about it then.
Table that policy, or?
Table the discussion about federal government mandating we take in a lot of refugees. If there's any signs of that happening, then we can have a more thoughtful discussion around it.
So I'll bring that up under new business then, and then we can talk about it there.
If we see signs of it happening and we need to do something about it, then yeah.
Well, I might want to just discuss it, and whether it's just with myself or with Dave, I'll discuss it. Okay.
are there any other questions about items related to policy, either for first or second reading? If not, we're moving on to the next item. Under other, gifts and donations, there are none for your consideration. Trips, there's approve a trip for the Methacton Ski Club. Are there any questions on any items under 14? If not, number 15, there are dates for board members' calendars. And then under old business, there are 3 items under business: superintendent's contract, enrollment study update, and timeline discussion, and a high school scheduling update. I want to start with the enrollment study update. So with that, in an effort to update the board and the public on the enrollment projections, it should be known that in keeping with the project timeline, the Board of School Directors has received a preliminary draft of the enrollment projections from our consultant. The report, while not complete, reflects extensive and ongoing research into the district's demographics, real estate market, economy, and recent trends, which has been collected and reviewed by the district, township, and county staff. While the projections cannot be finalized until each school's enrollment is officially reported for this year, and typically that's sometime after October 1, the preliminary projections, which include scenarios forecasting a range of housing and economic conditions, indicate that stagnant or declining enrollment is likely to continue over the next 10 years. The various scenarios play out in continuing decline, slow decline with periods of stabilization, and brief decline followed by stabilization. These scenarios align with the previous projection report that the board received in 2015. We have been and will continue to review this report to ensure that it can serve as a reliable foundation for planning the future of our schools. A final report and presentation on enrollment is due in mid to late October. In light of this preliminary information and in consideration of the project timeline, it is my responsibility to recommend to the board that Phase 2 of this project be considered for approval at the voting meeting next week. In doing so, an approval of Phase 2 work by Mylone and McBroom in the amount of $32,850 to include facilities capacity, redistricting options, recommendations and reports, and presentations will provide information critical to this matter and help prepare us to make decisions in December or January of this school year. I am asking the board if they want me to place this recommendation on the board agenda for next week. And you may have additional questions or comments related to that, but that's what I'm recommending to start our discussion here this evening.
The report that has been received prior to it being the recommendation for us to go to Phase 2, will that report be made public?
The preliminary draft report, it's the recommendation of the consultant that because the data is not complete, meaning they do not have all the live birth data, and it's not a complete report. So which you don't, if you recall, what we don't have at this moment in time is the report of the by individual buildings, which is part of what their deliverable was. So they have the birth data that they still need to add, and they need to add in the this year's October 1 enrollment data.
So Phase 2 is not that piece of it. That piece is the end of Phase 1.
That is the end of Phase 1. So the original project timeline said that by the middle of October or late of October, the final report would be presented in a public meeting by Mylone and McBroom representatives.
So, but we're being asked to make a decision on moving forward with Phase 2 without the benefit of any input from the public on Phase 1.
That is accurate. Yeah, I mean, the timeline was presented. The board and I knew of the timeline when we first got into the matter. The choice you have, and I understand your question, Brenda. I mean, it's certainly a challenging question, but it is one that we have a choice. We have a choice to wait to mid to late October for the final report, gain input from the public, and then move on to Phase 2. I can tell you that by doing that, we are now 2 years out from making the decision. The one thing that we said going into this process was that we owed our staff, our families, a decision this December, January. And I thought we all agreed on that. So we can choose, first of all, to wait till we get that input. But I'm going to tell you at this point in time, you've all received the report. I've received a report. I've talked to the great length with Mylone and McBroom. While they have data to add, this is what the preliminary report is suggesting.
Just for a point of clarification, so what will the voting item say next week?
The voting item for next week would be to approve Mylone and McBroom to proceed with Phase 2 of the work in the amount of $32,850.
Okay, and I know that this was a concern for both myself and I believe it was Mr. Roth as well, in terms of Mylone and McBroom had certain areas in enrollment projections that we were very comfortable with, but when it came down to the second phase of this, the redrawing and redistricting aspect, that there were companies in prior RFPs who seemed to have a much better handle on this. So I'm just curious, is this a done deal? Was this part of a prior vote where we said that for Part 1 and Part 2 we will use Mylone and McBroom?
We did not say that. I think that the board gave me direction to move forward with Mylone and McBroom for Phase 1, and that we would consider Phase 2 at a later date and who that vendor would be. So it's quite possible that the board has other opinions associated with who that vendor should be, but it's my recommendation at this point in the process that we keep the work with one vendor. To keep the continuity and to keep the timeline in place. They certainly have the expertise. While I will agree that some of the previous RFP responses showed some vendors with some really impressive software offerings and prices that were much less than this, I don't think we can it's just going to be additionally challenging to take data that's not complete till mid-October, November, to then kind of put this into a process to allow another vendor to go ahead and try to create the redistricting scenarios. Not that it can't happen, I'm just going to say there's a level of complexity with this. Now, you also need to recall that a lot of our discussion around who to finally decide to take this work was centered around the continuity. So my original recommendation to the board was to move forward with Montgomery County Planning Commission. It was then the discussion by the board, and I felt that it was pretty unanimous discussion that, you know, keeping continuity was an important piece, and therefore, you know, after doing further review, I considered the same advantages, and therefore changed my recommendation to Milo and McBroom, which we then approved, and we said we would not start phase 2 without getting the preliminary report. Okay. And so I think we're right at that stage right now where we've received a preliminary report. Based on the timeline, it's appropriate for us to look in the month of September to approve phase 2 work to start. That way it allows us to be at a position in December to have all the reports and the data necessary for us to make the decision.
Okay. Just to add to that one thing, we also talked about having them do all the possible scenarios. So, you know, but redistricting with all the existing buildings, redistricting, reducing buildings, redistricting with, you know, what's the impact of adding kindergarten, and all those scenarios all at once, so that we could kind of have that in hand when we decide what we want to do off of the phase 1.
Okay. Just 2 quick follow-ups here. I was one of the ones who didn't believe that this timeline was realistic, and I thought it would lead from one step to the next one in terms of rushing without having all the final numbers. And I agree that, you know, it looks like the numbers are going in one way, so I think it's safe to move ahead with part 2. My biggest concern here is the fact that the board, as of now, has seen nothing of what phase 2 looks like. So we don't know any of the deliverables. And we've just seen from the property assessment that when we vote for something with just a blanket number with a dollar amount, we don't know what we're voting for. You know, what are we owed? What is included in this? A couple of the companies had, you know, software technology with geocoding. Do they include that? To ask us, you know, in a week's notice, basically, to vote for something where we don't have nearly all of the information, I think is a little bit hasty. So maybe it's possible that we can have, you know, either you do a short presentation if you talk to them, or if they can be here to tell us what's included in phase 2, maybe I'd feel a little bit more comfortable. But this is just one of those things, again, where I don't want to vote for something without knowing what I'm voting for. So, thank you.
I just wanted real quick to add to what Chris said. That was my question, just because to refresh all of our memories, that phase 2 did include the different scenarios, so that kind of piggybacks to what Mike's saying. If we could get just some more information about what exactly, I would reiterate that.
Would a report maybe with the redacted schools and stuff of other work that they've done be appropriate?
You mean like?
I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about the deliverables, and you want to know, you know, what does a redistricting report look like? Is that what you're? Yeah. So if we get a report that they've done for another client, a school district, and we redact the names for that, and to show you the type of data and report and recommendations that they bring forward, would that be appropriate?
I believe that's definitely the first step of it, but I think the second part of it, again, and you know, Mr. Dorn's not here, but I think that this would be something that, you know, he would bring up again, is we have to make sure that that is included in the deliverables that we're signing off on. It's one thing for them to show us a prior report. It's a second to assume that we're going to get certain information.
I think I understand what you're saying. So in the contract that we signed, that allowed us to move forward with phase 1, there was a listing of the deliverables. We can add them into the. Would it be helpful to? I'll get you those, but do you want them into the wording of the actual motion? No, okay. But so the list of the deliverables, a sample report. Anything else that would be helpful for anyone?
They've done this quite a few times, so they should be able to put together a brief presentation that says, here are the steps we're going to go through, here's what's involved, here are the deliverables, and attach a sample report.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that we can see.
Are there any other questions about whether I should be placing this on the agenda or not?
Dave, yes. Is there a drop-dead date that if we don't have certain things completed, that if the decision is to close the school, that we won't be able to do it for next year? And what I'm getting at is, you're making a recommendation here to hire them on. So, for instance, we don't make that decision next week, it goes to next month, say it doesn't happen next month, and everything shows that a school should be closed, this is how it should look. Is there going to be a point in no return where next year's out of the question?
So there's a legal standard that we need to meet, but that's the very minimum, and that would put us, making decisions in May and June about a school closure. And I don't think we want to be there, because that's not enough time for us to properly, make that decision, and to communicate with families and to process things. It's been my recommendation, and that's why we have a timeline as we do here, that we make a decision no later than the end of January. And that's why the timeline is as it is today, and that's where my recommendation still lies, so that the proper, not only will a decision be made, but then the proper mechanism can go into place for dealing with the transition, if one were to occur.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is, it's just like the bus and transportation issue. I don't want to push things that you put out for recommendation, push them down, and then all of a sudden condense all this work in a short few months, when if you made your recommendation, certain things happen in a timely manner, then it would give you time to react and to make the appropriate decisions, that a closure would work flawlessly. And that's a stretch for government, for school districts. But, I just, I don't want to, hamper you from getting the work done, and then all of a sudden you get loaded up all at the end, and then something's here missed. And I would expect you that, hey, if you made the recommendations and we didn't follow them, and your timeline gets messed up for efficiently making this happen, and something goes wrong with it and things aren't as smooth as they should, yes, I can see where you can come back and say, look, I tried to get this timeline accomplished. Remember, you guys held me up here, here, and here based. So I'm taking your recommendation. I have no problem with it. But I also want to know, if this vote doesn't occur next week and it gets pushed back a month or 2 months, how it's going to affect the process, and is it going to condense at the end of the day where you're going to be rushing around?
We need to move forward. We're either going to approve my loan and approve them next week, or it's going to be another month the decision's made, and that's going to be another lost month. So that puts us into February, making a potential decision. So that while legally that's all fine and dandy, that's going to put us out of what I would consider our safe zone in terms of making the decision and allowing the proper communications to occur and the planning that our buildings would need to do if a decision would include a potential closure or redistricting or some other option. So in all fairness, I'm just staying to the timeline that we originally started with, suggesting that we take this vote in September, so that we can give Milo the direction, because they won't start any of this additional work without approval.
Okay, so simply said, you're staying within the timeline that we set forth a couple, and if this doesn't happen, then we're changing the timeline. The board's changed the timeline. Okay.
We're going to have to. Is there any other information or questions you have on the matter? If not, I'll add it onto the agenda, and I'll get you the deliverables and the sample agreement so that you can review that prior to your vote next week. And the next matter, matter C, old business, high school scheduling update. I just wanted to let you know that I provided an update to the board, but in general, the process update, the District Management Council studied all aspects of the Methacton High School schedule, including the current state, past schedules, process to build schedules, and desired areas of improvement. Via looking at the high school, visiting the high school site, talking with various stakeholders within the high school, including counselors, principals, teachers, etc. They also looked at school data analysis, looking at the staffing, enrollment, looked at analyze efficiency and strengths and weaknesses of the current schedule. And thirdly, they looked at our student information system and analyzed the capabilities of our use and utilization of that software. Basically, there were 4 primary observations at this point. They're certainly not done with their work, but as a status report, the process of creating schedules at Methacton High School could be streamlined to reduce the level of manual effort and work. So that's one of the preliminary observations. The second one is Methacton High School could take advantage of automated scheduling features available in leading software packages to streamline the scheduling process. So that's the second observation. The third one is that Methacton High School could address scheduling constraints that prevent students from enrolling in preferred courses and at the same time reduce enrollment in study halls, which is one of the things that administratively and educationally we're trying to provide more access to the sought-after courses, at the same time reducing study halls when they're not necessary. And the fourth observation is the district and school leaders could consider how the high school schedule and course offerings could further promote the district's vision for the future. And that centers around many of the discussions we've had in terms of the use of technology and integration of technology into the curriculum and instruction. So basically the next steps for the District Management Council is by mid-October, the DMC will provide options for further scheduling structures. As the district develops its vision for the future of the high school, the DMC will provide, will be a thought partner in considering some of those options going forward. So essentially, once we receive that report, it's likely a process where the high school principal and staff within the high school will review that report, look at options along with the central administration to determine what recommendation might be most favorable to gain some of the outcomes that we're seeking. So that will be a process that will probably take, maybe another month or two beyond the report delivery. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. Mr. Borderman, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything on the superintendent's contract.
Yeah, we're just finishing up a few last details and plan on voting on that for a 3-year new contract next week.
Okay. And then on item number 17, under a new business, there'll be an election of PSBA officers, and then we have courtesy of the floor for this evening.
Candy Oliva, Igaville, a number of things. Before you're discussing full-day kindergarten, I want to see a price tag on that first. Before you start discussing anything, we need to know how much it's going to cost the taxpayers. Because you wouldn't go out and buy a refrigerator, you look at the refrigerator and you look at the price tag. Then you decide whether you want the refrigerator or not. So we need to have that be up front before you move any further with this. Because this has been shot down in the past because it's too expensive for the school district. Number 2, what's the status on a business manager? I mean, I'm just curious. I'd like to know who is signing the checks and paying the bills in the business office, and whoever's doing that needs to be sitting in that chair to answer any questions on the list of bills, because I'm just curious who's paying the bills in the school district, because there is a list. So I'd just like to know the status on the business manager, and also the facilities report. When is that going to be made public? When is the public going to get a chance to look at a facilities report that's going to possibly cost millions of dollars to the taxpayers? I mean, I don't know if it's a draft or if it's in its final form yet or what the issue, but before you move forward on that, that needs to be made public, and the public should have know what you want to spend money on and why before you move forward. My last comment is, a few weeks ago, well, after the last school board meeting, it was brought to my attention that a school director made a comment about the people in the audience and called us crazies. I would like to know who's going to own that. Because personally, I find that insulting. I've been in this room for 10 years. And trust me, if I'm crazy, you haven't seen it. It is disrespectful to the members of the audience. It is insulting. When I stand up here, I do it to hold your feet to the fire. You are no different or any better than the previous school boards. And I've been doing it for 10 years. I've done the heavy lifting. I have put in the time. And I don't appreciate being insulted like that. I'm looking out for my money and how it's being spent. This is my school district, whether I like it or not. And if any school director has a problem with that, when you walk out the door tonight, don't come back. You're elected officials. You're elected by the taxpayers and the voters. We have every right to stand here and question you and criticize or commend you for the job that you do. If because I stood here last month and brought to your attention that you have to abide by the law, that's what you have to do. And I don't want any pat on the back because I'm sitting here for 10 years. I really seriously, at the end of August, considered not coming again. Because for 10 years, I am, at this point, seeing a board that looks no different than the past boards. Because you're doing the same thing, you're spending money, you have an attorney sit there and tell you, do not answer the public. No. You were supposed to be different. And in my opinion, if this school district never announced they were going to close the school, if that was never a public discussion, the face of this board would look exactly like the previous board. I don't think any of you would be on the board. Because, not to be disrespectful or insulting, I didn't see any of you sitting here for the last 10 years. I didn't see us come out for or against Skyview. I didn't see you come out for or against Turf Field. But I was here, and I have been verbally abused by members of the public, and that hasn't stopped me. Previous boards have never insulted me. If they had something to say to me, the board of directors said it from the table, or they said it to my face afterwards. And we had an adult conversation. And I have never respected any school board director. And I don't want to start now. I have come here and I've done what I've done because I've wanted to do it. I don't ask for your respect, I don't demand it, but as a decent human being, you need to give the people in the audience the respect that they deserve if they're showing up here, if they care enough to show up here. But to be insulted like that, I'm not going to tolerate it. My money is just as green as everyone else's, and I can honestly say I've been paying taxes in this school district a lot longer than most of you have. And I want to see a bang for my buck, and I have every right to question every penny you spend. This is a public meeting, and I'm a member of the public, a tax-paying member and a voter. And if anybody has anything they want to say to me during the meeting or after me, feel free. Call me on the phone, tell me who you are. I will have a dialogue with you. I have no problem. But if you want to insult me or be disrespectful, apparently you people haven't met me, because I can give it right back. And I won't do it because I was raised better than that. I have not agreed with a lot of the boards. I have not wanted to see what they did, but I have never been disrespectful for them, because I do personally know that's a hard job there. You have to bring your A game, and you better find out what you're doing before you do it. And I know from sitting in this room, and I know sitting there I have more power. That job comes and goes. The board's changed I don't know how many times, and God willing, I'll still be sitting here. But I think to insult members of the public, that needs to stop. Because I'm going to tell you right now, as a member, I won't tolerate it from anyone at all. Thank you.
Jim Malik, Worcester. I have a thicker skin than, well, you have a thick skin too. But I think if you're saying that, all the crazies come out, I don't know who made the comment up there, but not good. Regardless of what you think of us, you guys got, you wanted the job. You're political people. We're members of the public. We're voters. We're taxpayers. If you think we're crazy, keep it to yourself. Go home and tell your spouse. But don't say it in here. It doesn't fly. Your executive session announcement, personnel. What was your announcement again? Because it sounds to me like it's exactly the same as a month ago.
Well, if you want me to read.
Go ahead.
Okay, it says executive session of the board held 9/8/2016
Just the
for
person.
matter of personnel on administrative employee.
What was that again?
For matter of personnel on an administrative employee.
Yeah, exactly the same. That's not appropriate, again. So this is warning number 2. There's not going to be a warning number 3. That's a violation of the Sunshine Law. Okay? Hiring, firing, something. Because I can't tell whether that's an executive session or not. Plus, there's an agreement between us and you guys that says you have to do it. There's not going to be a third warning. I'll tell you right now. I'll just go to the court and get an order and you'll do it my way. So you decide what you want to do. You just did it the wrong way twice. I'll assume the third time it's intentional. Okay? So you better get some advice. Go talk to Mr. Bartle and get some good advice, because this is number 2. There won't be number 3. Oh, there may be number 3, but number 3 is going to put an end to the problem. I let you get away with it twice. The third time is going to be a problem. I'm just telling you, so you know. I listened to your discussion. What a waste of time on this enrollment. What a waste of time. Time and money. We were, a year and a half ago, we're sitting in a hearing. You guys are lambasting the board about how ridiculous their figures are. How ridiculous. How they're wrong. How they don't know what they're talking about. Well, you guys are wrong. You guys were wrong. Enrollment is going down. You guys are going to have to close the school. You guys have too much capacity to the tune of maybe 1,400 seats. What a waste of time. A year, almost 2 years has been wasted because of the theatrics that went on a year and a half ago. Remember the theatrics that went on? I got the videotape of the statistician and all the merriment that went on at the meeting, the screaming and yelling at the board members about how they didn't know what was going on. And now what happens? I just did some simple work. I went to the website. I went to your website here at Methacton, okay? Here's the data. You like data, I'll give you data. This is data from your website. Your enrollment peaked in 2006 at 5454. Total enrollment. 2015, 2016, it's 4864. A straight line down. This is from right from your website. You don't have to hire some, 40 grand. There it is. It's a straight line down. Okay? Then I went to the Montco PA site and got the birth data. You guys can go to the Montco PA site and get your birth data as well. Here's the birth data from Montco, PA. I got birth data from 2009, 10, and 11. 321, 285, and 339. It's flat. It's flat. Well, you know what that means. There's a 5-year lag. You're a statistician. You know all that stuff. Well, that means flat. It's not going to go up. It's going to be flat. So I know from personal experience, because I got the 5-6 building voided, that they planned for 6,300 students to be at the 5-6 building and the overall enrollment. Well, if they planned for 6,300 and you only have 4,800, that's a difference of 1,400, 1,500 students. So you have a capacity excess of 1,400 seats. Wow. Common sense. 1,400 extra seats you have. You're going to have to close one school. Common sense. You don't need 36 grand. I'm telling you right now what your 36 grand is going to tell you. You need to close a school. Maybe even 2. And redistrict. So give me the money. Give it to me. I just told you what you're going to have to do. It's all common sense. Here it is. Here it is. I got it from your website. You guys are spending $36K. You spent 40 grand on the other stuff, and then made these guys wait 2 years because of all your theatrics. What a colossal waste of time and money. You talk about an apology. I mean, what? I'm a taxpayer. What a waste of my money. I mean, you're the statistician, man. I'd expect you to, take this stuff. Well, I'm sitting in the back going, what are these guys talking about? Dr. Zerby's like, let's go, let's go. I thought you'd be going, hey, he's right on. You got access to the data. I thought you'd be going, bingo. I guess not, huh?
Thank you. Anybody else?
John Andrews, Lower Providence. I see on this evening's agenda, or the agenda for next week, you're going to be asked to vote on the substitutes for the ski trip this winter. The ski trip club is a social club. I don't see how you can justify spending district money on substitutes because you're taking the kids out of school for a day and the teachers out of school for a day. Last year, that thing was able to be held, I believe, over the President's Day holiday when there were no school days involved. last year, that was done because I'd spoken up the year before. So we're going on like 3 years where there's an unjustified expense. In the list of bills, there's I think a $325 item from the general fund for something to do with putting the Windy Hill online, something like that. The Windy Hill hasn't been published now for two or more years, so you know. But before that, it was online, so I don't understand what's going on there. I asked at one of the committee meetings within the week, is there a date for when the data portfolio for the last school year will be issued? Under Dr. Quinn, it was issued in January for 3 or 4 years. And I didn't get an answer for when it'll be issued. With regard to this meeting room, it has a seating capacity of approximately 100, and the district has rooms with larger seating capacity, so when we come to give these honors awards and we have standing room only, if we had a fire marshal doing his job, he'd shut you down. And for the life of me, I can't understand why the auditorium in this very same building wouldn't suffice for that type of a thing. And along these lines, the foyer at the top of the stairs is hardly an adequate place to give out certificates to 150 students. So I think, and I think Dr. Zerbe is correct as to wanting to hold to the timeline for decisions relative to the next school year based on enrollment. And I did hear him say that with regard to the preliminary report, there are indications in it of stagnant enrollment. And I think that there's lots of things going on where, to my way of thinking, the enrollment decline is over. And for this very year, the September 1 report shows enrollment flat with last year, whereas enrollment projections were anticipating a drop of something like 60 students. Also the birth rate through the 2015 year, the birth rate has stopped going down. But overall, I think the introduction of thoughts about full-time kindergarten and a liberal majority of the board saying, yeah, let's go for it, with zero discussion of costs and facilities capability in the elementary schools was clearly missing. The additional employee costs would be on the order of $1.5 million, and probably an extra dozen rooms would be required. And we still have Act 1, and I don't know of any move to do away with Act 1. And if that were to happen, I think you'd get 10 or 15 million taxpayers in this Commonwealth to object. The taxpayers don't have gold mines.
Anyone? Yeah.
Joe Bickelman from Audubon. I'd just like to address the transportation issue. I don't have to tiptoe around who's responsible. I think the person that's responsible is Dr. Zerbe. Okay, he's responsible that he took all the data that came from his cabinet or from his administrator, and he digested that, and he brought the recommendation to the board that it could be done when it couldn't be done, obviously. You know, I appreciate Mr. Winter's apology and the such, but, you know, he brought to you the information. So he's responsible for what happened. He brought the recommendation to outsource transportation. He brought the recommendation to put on the agenda to hire Mr. Williams, the district area manager for First Student. He wanted to hire him as a transportation director. So he thought it was okay to put that on the agenda for approval and to make him a district employee. After the board went through executive session, he was removed and wasn't approved. Dr. Zerbe brought to you a hire for the transportation director from Virginia. That was a good idea to bring someone from Virginia to be the transportation director. That was Bob Laws, who you couldn't find anything on the internet about Bob Laws. He didn't do any presentations, any seminars, anything. You know, so I don't know how Bob Laws got hired, but Dr. Zerbe puts the agenda together, and he thought it was a good idea to hire somebody from Virginia. Dr. Zerbe thought it was a good idea to hire a consultant, and it sounded like the consultant, you know, you had Bus Boss just totally wipe out the old runs and reestablish new runs. And you had a very short amount of time to check those runs, but you know, when I think about it, I think about these elementary schools in the sending areas, and I think about the sending areas for the elementary schools, and you get the runs and you get 80 runs. You know, I don't know, you sit down and you read the runs and look at a map, you follow it, you add up the kids at the stops because they're on the report. How long does it take to sit down and just read it and have somebody that's familiar with the area sit with you and go around the map and do 80 runs? I don't know how long that takes, you know, just to do it that way and adjust it accordingly. 14-15 school year was the first year that First Student took over, and there was no transportation director. The 14-15 school year went rather well, and then we hired a transportation director in March of 15. And the 15-16 school year didn't go so well, and the 16-17 school year was a catastrophe. When I was a member of the superintendent's cabinet for a lot of years at Colonial, I did everything I could to make my superintendent look good. And I think the superintendent made sure that we made him look good. And if you didn't, you know, Mr. Whiteleather isn't here and Mr. Laws isn't here. So those things happen, but you need to surround yourself with some good people and people that are going to stay till 2 or 3 in the morning if they have to make you look good, to make sure the parents get a product that they don't have to struggle with. You need to have people like that that are going to go the extra mile and actually put in the time if you have to. Because, let's face it, bus stops and the bus routing is a very visible portion of the district. And you don't let that product go out unless it's 100% ironed out, and you stay till all hours of the night, day in and day out, till it gets done properly. You just don't let it go out. That's what I have to say about transportation. The other item has to do with the enrollment projections. You know, these enrollment projections, it's not a complicated process. You have, every year I did them with the personnel director because he had to know how many teachers to hire in October. So you have the birth data, You have historical retention data that goes back. You're going to have a 5-year lead time if you see any blips in this thing. But to go through this whole process and have, pay all this money out, it's very simple. It's a simple process. And to have you come back with a statement that it's going to decline or be stagnant, I think that coincides with Mr. Andrews' recommendation back in 2006-07 when, he was doing it for Skyview justification that they didn't listen to the man. But it's real simple. And with spreadsheets and historical data, it's a simple task. I did it every October with the HR director. Simple task. I don't understand why we're paying all the money. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to the executive.
Yeah.
Get it over with.
Announce it.
Yeah, no, because...
Yeah. All right, motion during the meeting. Second. Everybody. All right, thank you, everybody. Good night.